The Syrian desert has a way of swallowing everything: sound, light, hope, memory. It takes what men carry in their hearts and buries it beneath endless dunes that have witnessed the rise and fall of empires for 5,000 years. Assyrians, Babylonians, Romans, Crusaders, Ottomans, Americans. The sand remembers them all and cares for none of them. Tonight, the desert waits with ancient patience, watching 12 American warriors move through darkness toward a fate that none of them can see coming. Master Chief Marcus Stone has spent 22 years learning to read the language of silence. He knows the difference between the quiet of an empty building and the quiet of men holding their breath behind walls. He can hear the creak of a floorboard 3 rooms away and know whether the weight upon it belongs to friend or enemy. He can taste the chemical signature of explosives on the wind and know whether a door has been rigged before his hand ever touches the handle. These skills have kept him alive through 247 operations across 4 continents, through firefights in the mountains of Afghanistan, where the air was so thin that every breath felt like drowning, through urban warfare in Fallujah, where death waited behind every doorway and every window, through jungle operations in the Philippines, where insurgents vanished into green shadows and reappeared behind you with knives drawn. Tonight, at 58 years old, with knees that ache in the cold and shoulders that carry the weight of 3 decades of secrets he can never share, Marcus Stone feels something he has not felt in a very long time. Fear, not the fear of death. He made peace with that possibility 20 years ago, in a bunker in Kandahar, when a Taliban rocket missed his head by 6 inches and painted the wall behind him with stone fragments that should have been pieces of his skull. Every breath after that moment has been borrowed time. He has lived on credit ever since, spending borrowed days in borrowed places, knowing that someday the debt would come due. The fear he feels tonight is different, older, deeper. It is the fear of recognition, the fear of seeing something impossible and knowing in your bones that it is real. Because walking at the rear of his 12-man formation, silent as a shadow cast by nothing, moves a woman who should not exist, Captain Elena Carter. According to her personnel file, she is 37 years old, a technical communications specialist attached to this mission at the last minute to field test some new satellite equipment that the brass once evaluated in operational conditions. Her basic training records show she failed the obstacle course twice before barely scraping through on her 3rd attempt. She needed waivers signed by 3 different officers just to graduate. She has never fired a shot in actual combat, never seen blood outside of training videos, never experienced the specific horror of watching someone die in front of her and knowing there was nothing she could do to stop it. On paper, she is exactly the kind of support personnel that special operators love to mock and dismiss. A checkbox on someone's diversity report, a political necessity rather than a tactical asset, dead weight that real warriors have to carry through the darkness. But Marcus Stone has been watching Elena Carter for 68 hours now, and everything about her is wrong. She moves through the Syrian night with the fluid economy of someone who has spent years learning to make every motion count. Most people walk with wasted energy, their bodies betraying tension and uncertainty through 1,000 small inefficiencies. Elena Carter flows. There is no other word for it. Her footsteps fall in perfect rhythm with the team ahead of her, never early, never late, as if she can anticipate changes in pace before they happen. Her eyes, when Stone catches glimpses of them through his night vision optics, never stop moving. They scan the terrain with the automatic precision of a predator assessing hunting grounds. Left to right, near to far, ground to rooftop. A systematic pattern that special operators spend months learning to perform unconsciously. She learned it somewhere, from someone. And those eyes, gray like winter storm clouds, cold and sharp and utterly without fear. Eyes that held secrets most people could never imagine. He has seen eyes like that exactly once before in his life. The memory crashes through his mental defenses like a wave breaking against a seawall. He has spent 31 years building that wall, brick by brick, pushing the images down into the darkness where they could not reach him. But tonight, walking through the Syrian desert toward a mission that feels wrong in ways he cannot explain, the wall crumbles. October 3rd, 1993, Mogadishu, Baccarat Market. The name still carries weight among special operators. They speak it in quiet voices, the way medieval peasants spoke of plague towns. Some things leave marks that never fade. Some places hold memories that echo through decades. Stone was 27 years old that day, a newly minted member of SEAL Team 6, still young enough to believe that courage and training could overcome any obstacle. He had graduated at the top of his buds class. He had earned his trident through 6 months of suffering that broke lesser men. He had proven himself in training exercises that simulated every conceivable combat scenario. He thought he understood war. He thought he understood death. He thought he understood what it meant to face impossible odds and find a way through. He was wrong about all of it. He learned different that day. The mission had started simply enough: capture or kill a Somali warlord who was disrupting humanitarian aid operations. Insert by helicopter, secure the target, extract before the local militia could respond in force. Textbook operation, the kind of surgical strike that special operations forces executed regularly. But nothing in Somalia was ever simple. The Black Hawks went down. The quick reaction force got ambushed. The 15-minute mission turned into a 15-hour nightmare that would haunt American military planning for decades. His team had been trapped for 6 hours in a maze of narrow streets and crumbling buildings. The afternoon sun had turned the city into an oven, heat shimmering off concrete while bullets cracked overhead. The smell of cordite and blood and burning rubber filled every breath. The sound of Somali voices howling for American blood echoed from every direction. 50 hostile fighters stood between them and extraction. Minimum. Probably more. The streets were crawling with militia who had emerged from every doorway and alley, drawn by the sound of the Black Hawks going down, hungry for the chance to kill the invaders who had come to their city. Air support had been diverted to other crash sites. Reinforcements were hours away, fighting through their own gauntlets of fire. The mathematics of their situation was simple and brutal. They were going to die. Stone had accepted it, not with peace, but with the grim resignation of a professional who understood that this was always how it might end. He had written letters to his family before the deployment, letters that sat in a file at the base, letters that would be delivered if he did not come home. He had said the things that needed to be said, made the apologies that needed to be made. All that remained was to take as many of them with him as he could before the end. And then Wraith appeared. Stone never learned the man's real name, never saw his face clearly in the chaos and smoke. He simply materialized from the shadows of a half-collapsed building, stepping out of darkness as if the darkness itself had given him birth. Medium height, medium build, brown hair cut military short. Nothing remarkable about his appearance except the way he moved, and his eyes. Gray like polished steel. The same eyes Stone would see again 31 years later in a Syrian desert. Wraith killed 8 militia fighters in the first 30 seconds. Stone watched, frozen in something between terror and awe, as this stranger flowed through enemy positions like water through sand. The first fighter never saw him coming. Wraith appeared behind the man and did something with his hands, something too fast to follow, and the fighter crumpled without a sound. The second fighter turned toward the noise and met an elbow strike that shattered his jaw and dropped him instantly. The third raised his AK-47, but Wraith was already inside his guard, one hand redirecting the barrel while the other found the vulnerable spot beneath the fighter's ear. 8 men, 30 seconds, not a single shot fired. Stone had trained in close-quarters combat for years. He had studied Krav Maga and Jiu-Jitsu and the brutal efficiency of military combatives. He had never seen anything like what Wraith did. The movements were beyond training, beyond skill. They seemed to exist in a realm where physics bent to the will of a single man. Then Wraith turned to Stone's team and spoke with a voice that carried absolute command, low, calm, certain. "Follow me. Step exactly where I step. Make no sound. I am taking you out of here." They followed. 800 meters through hostile territory, through gaps in enemy coverage that should not have existed, through patrol patterns that Wraith anticipated before the patrols arrived. He read the urban terrain like a musician reading sheet music, finding melodies of survival in the cacophony of a city trying to kill them. Stone had never seen anything like it, had never imagined anything like it was possible. This man moved through a hostile environment in the way other people walk through their own living rooms. Every step deliberate, every motion economical, every decision made with a certainty that left no room for doubt. Twice, Wraith held up a fist and the team froze. Both times, militia patrols passed within 10 meters of their position without seeing them. Wraith had known they were coming before there was any possible way to know. had positioned the team in dead zones that the enemy could not see. When they reached the extraction point, 200 meters from the helicopters that would carry them to safety, the militia finally caught up. 100 fighters, maybe more, converging from every direction. Their fury at being outmaneuvered by a single man had transformed into something primal and terrifying. They screamed for blood. They fired wildly into every shadow. Wraith had turned to face them. "Keep moving, petty officer. Get your team to the helicopters. I will buy you the time you need." Stone had tried to argue, tried to stay and fight alongside this stranger who had saved them all from certain death. Wraith had looked at him with that steel gaze, cold and absolute, and spoken words that Stone has carried in his heart for 31 years. "Someday you will meet my successor. When that day comes, remember what I am about to do. Remember that we do not die. We simply pass on what we know to those who come after." Then Wraith had pressed something into Stone's hand, a small piece of metal, a patch with a symbol that Stone did not recognize. No words, no explanation. "Keep this. Give it to the one who follows me. They will understand what it means." Wraith walked back toward the converging militia, a single man against 100 enemies, David without a sling, Leonidas without an army. Stone got his team to the helicopters. They lifted off into the morning sky, rotors tearing at the smoke-filled air. Through the open door, Stone looked down at Bakara Market and saw something he will never forget. A single figure standing in the middle of a street carpeted with bodies, still fighting, still buying them time. The last Stone saw of Wraith, the man was surrounded by enemies on all sides, moving through them like a blade through paper, buying seconds and minutes with a currency that could not be replenished. He never saw Wraith again. The official reports listed the engagement as a successful extraction, despite heavy resistance. The classified after-action review mentioned an unknown friendly operator who assisted in the evacuation but could not be identified. No body was ever recovered. No identity was ever established. Wraith became a ghost story that operators told each other in the dark, a legend that grew with each retelling. Some said he was CIA, some said Delta Force, some said he was something else entirely, something that did not appear in any organizational chart or budget document. Stone knew only one thing for certain. Wraith had saved his life in the lives of his entire team, and he had died doing it. For 31 years, Stone has carried that metal patch. He keeps it in the inner pocket of whatever tactical vest he is wearing, close to his heart, a reminder of a debt that can never be repaid. He has looked for Wraith's successor in every operation, every training exercise, every briefing room. He has searched the faces of hundreds of special operators, looking for those distinctive eyes, looking for that impossible fluidity of movement. He never found them, until 68 hours ago, when a woman stepped off a Chinook helicopter at Forward Operating Base Kurd 6 and looked at him with eyes that stopped his heart. The compound materializes from the darkness ahead. 200 meters of open ground, then concrete walls scarred by years of conflict. Soviet-era construction, built in the 1970s to process chemicals for Assad's war machine, abandoned and repurposed a dozen times as Syria tore itself apart. 2 stories. Multiple entry points. Windows that should show the thermal signatures of guards and hostages, but somehow feel empty. Stone signals the team to halt. 12 operators freeze in perfect formation, weapons covering every angle of approach. Chief Petty Officer Derek Walsh on his right flank, built like a linebacker, 14 years of combat experience coiled in his muscles. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell center formation, their combat medic, auburn hair pulled back tight beneath her helmet, hands that have pulled wounded operators back from the edge of death more times than she can count. Ryan Torres covering the rear sector, youngest of the team at 29, still learning the patience that separates good operators from great ones. And Elena Carter, barely visible at the edge of Stone's peripheral vision, watching the compound with an intensity that betrays her supposed background. Stone keys his radio, voice barely above a whisper. "All elements, Reaper 1, final approach. Breach in 5 mics. Stay sharp." The team begins moving again, 12 shadows flowing through the Syrian night. But Stone's mind is not entirely on the mission ahead. It is 68 hours in the past, watching a scene play out in a military mess hall that changed everything. Forward Operating Base Kurd 6 had been controlled chaos when the Chinook touched down, helicopters coming and going, supply trucks kicking up dust that coated everything in a fine brown film. Operators from half a dozen different units moving with purpose through the afternoon heat. The smell of jet fuel and sweat and the particular metallic tang that seems to pervade every forward operating base in every war. Stone had led his team to their assigned barracks, a climate-controlled metal container divided into bunks. The air conditioning hummed against the 100-degree heat outside, creating a bubble of artificial comfort in the middle of a combat zone. The team had settled in with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this hundreds of times before. Gear stowed, weapons cleaned, personal effects arranged in the small spaces that each man could call his own for the duration of the deployment. Elena Carter had found her rack in the corner, furthest from the door, furthest from everyone else. She had unpacked her gear with methodical precision. Every item organized exactly as regulations specified, not a single piece of equipment out of place. Stone had watched her from across the room, pretending to review mission documents while his eyes tracked her movements. There was something wrong about the way she unpacked, something too efficient, too practiced. Support personnel in their first deployment usually fumbled with their gear, uncertain where things should go, nervous about making mistakes in front of experienced operators. Elena Carter moved like she had done this 1,000 times before. Walsh had noticed too, or rather he had noticed her, and he had decided to establish the natural order of things. "Hope you are ready for this, Captain." His voice carried the edge of contempt that operators often reserve for support personnel. This is not garrison life. This is the real thing. People get hurt out here. People die. Elena had met his eyes without flinching. "I understand, Chief. Do you?" Walsh had stepped closer, using his considerable size to intimidate. "Because out here, you are not going to have some sergeant holding your hand. You make one mistake, you compromise one position, and people die. My brothers die. You understand what that means? I will not compromise the mission, Chief." Stone had watched the exchange with carefully concealed interest. He had seen Walsh use this routine countless times before. It always worked. Newcomers wilted under the pressure. They apologized. They promised to stay out of the way. They accepted their place at the bottom of the hierarchy. Elena Carter had simply looked at Walsh with that unwavering gaze and repeated her statement. No anger, no defensiveness, no submission. Just calm, absolute certainty. Walsh had turned away, shaking his head. But Stone had noticed the confusion in his expression. The intimidation had failed, and Walsh could not understand why. Neither could Stone, not then. But he was beginning to form a theory. The mess hall incident happened the next day. The room was packed with bodies and noise, and the desperate energy of men who knew they might not survive the week. Operators from multiple units crowded the tables, eating food that tasted like cardboard, and washing it down with coffee strong enough to strip paint. The conversations were loud, overlapping, punctuated by the occasional burst of dark laughter that soldiers used to hold back the fear. Stone had been sitting 3 tables away from Walsh's group, eating mechanically while his mind ran through mission parameters. He had positioned himself with a clear sight line to the door, an old habit that he had never broken. Always know your exits, always see who is coming, always be ready for the moment when everything goes wrong. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look older than they were. The air smelled of rehydrated eggs, an industrial cleaning solution, and the particular musk of men who had not showered properly in days. Elena had entered the mess hall alone. She moved through the door with that same careful precision Stone had noticed before, her eyes scanning the room in a single sweep before she stepped fully inside. She had collected her meal, standard deployment rations, and begun navigating through the crowded space toward an empty seat in the corner. She had been passing Walsh's table when it happened. Walsh shifted in his seat, a small movement, his elbow extended at exactly the wrong moment. The tray went flying, food scattered across the floor, sauce splattered on Elena's uniform. The room went quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye turned to the spectacle. Then someone laughed. "Damn, Captain. Maybe work on those motor skills before we go down range." More laughter rippled through the room. The cruel amusement of stressed men finding an easy target. Stone watched Elena's face, watched for the flash of anger or embarrassment that should have appeared. Watched for any reaction at all. Her expression did not change. Her body did not tense. She simply looked down at the mess on the floor, then at Walsh, who was very carefully not meeting her eyes. She simply knelt down and began cleaning up the mess with napkins from a nearby table. "Sorry about that, ma'am. Walsh's voice dripped false sincerity. "Tables are pretty cramped in here. Easy to have accidents." "It is fine, Chief." She finished cleaning, disposed of the ruined food, walked out of the mess hall with her head up and her expression perfectly neutral. Behind her, the conversation resumed. She was already forgotten. But Stone had not forgotten. He had seen the deliberate elbow, the calculated angle, the way Walsh had positioned himself for maximum effect. This was not an accident. This was a message, a reminder of where Elena Carter stood in the hierarchy. And he had seen something else, something that changed everything. When Elena knelt to clean the mess, her head had turned for just a fraction of a second. Her eyes had swept the room in a single smooth motion, not the random glance of an embarrassed person, a tactical scan. In less than 2 seconds, she had mapped every exit, every sightline, every person in that room. Stone recognized the pattern because he did the same thing every time he entered an unfamiliar space. It was trained behavior, automatic, the kind of assessment that special operators spent months learning to perform unconsciously. Elena Carter had learned it somewhere, from someone, and then her eyes had met his across the crowded room. The same storm cloud gray, the same steel beneath the surface. Stone's heart had stopped, just for a moment, just long enough for certainty to crash through every rational explanation he might construct. This woman was not a communication specialist. She was something else, something connected to the ghost who had saved his life. The mission briefing had taken place that evening in a climate-controlled room that smelled of coffee and electronics. Maps covered the walls. Satellite imagery filled the screens. Chief Warrant Officer Victor Langston stood at the front, running through the intelligence summary with the confidence of a man who had spent 20 years turning raw data into actionable targeting packages. Stone had known Langston for 15 years. They had served together in Afghanistan back in 2005, sharing a forward operating base during the surge operations that had tried to stabilize Helmand Province. Langston was competent, thorough, professional, the kind of intelligence officer that operators learned to trust because his assessments were usually accurate. His brother Thomas had been an operator of some kind back in the early 90s. Classified unit, high speed, low drag, as the saying went. Thomas had died in October 1993, listed as missing in action in an operation that did not officially exist. Body never recovered. The loss had changed Victor, made him harder, made him obsessive about intelligence accuracy, made him determined to prevent other operators from suffering the same fate his brother had suffered. "Target is here," Langston pointed to the map. Raqqa outskirts, Syrian desert, abandoned chemical processing facility, Soviet-era construction. ISIS regional commander Ibrahim al-Rashid is holding 3 American journalists. 2 males, 1 female, captured 16 days ago near the Turkish border. The satellite imagery appeared on the main screen. Stone studied it with the intensity he brought to every mission. 200 meters across, multiple buildings, concrete walls, clear sight lines. Guard force estimated 20 to 30 fighters, Langston continued. Standard ISIS cell, AK pattern weapons, some RPGs. Nothing sophisticated. Our source inside Raqqa confirms 3 hostages alive as of 48 hours ago. They are being held in the main building, 2nd floor, northwest corner. Stone nodded. The tactical picture was favorable. 12 operators against 20 to 30 defenders. Night approach. Breaching charges. Systematic room clearing. Helicopters standing by for extraction. Textbook operation. The kind of mission DevGru executed regularly. But something felt wrong. Stone looked at the thermal overlay on the satellite imagery, counted the heat signatures. Once, twice, 3 times. 8 signatures. Langston's briefing indicated 7 personnel. 4 guards in the target building plus 3 hostages. That was 7. Where was the 8th heat source? And the structural data seemed off. The window dimensions in the thermal imagery suggested larger openings than the visible spectrum showed, as if someone had modified the building after the satellite pass. Removed window frames, created firing positions. Neither discrepancy made sense for a standard ISIS holding facility. Stone opened his mouth to ask the question when movement caught his attention. In the back of the room, Elena Carter sat perfectly still, but her eyes were moving, scanning the same imagery Stone had been studying. Her brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, her lips pressed together in a thin line. She had seen it too. Stone waited for her to speak, to raise her hand, to point out the discrepancy. She did not. She made a note in a small pad, filed the information away, returned her attention to Langston's presentation with no outward sign that anything was wrong. Why, what was she waiting for? The briefing continued. Mission timeline. Insert at 0200 hours local. Approach on foot from the northeast. Breach at 0330. Extract hostages. Emergency extraction, 0.3 kilometers west. Helicopter pickup on completion. Stone asked the standard questions, rules of engagement, communications protocols, emergency procedures. Langston answered them all with practiced efficiency. When the briefing ended, the team filed out to begin final preparations. Stone hung back, watching Elena. She remained in her seat, studying the satellite imagery one final time. He approached her. "Something on your mind, Captain?" She looked up. Her expression betrayed nothing. "The thermal signatures, Master Chief. They do not quite match the structural data." "How so?" She pointed to the screen. 8 heat sources. The briefing indicated 7 total personnel, and these window dimensions suggest different construction than the visible spectrum shows. Stone leaned closer, studying where she was pointing. He saw exactly what she meant. The discrepancies were subtle, but they were there. "Could be infrared scatter from the concrete," he said. "Soviet facilities have inconsistent thermal properties." "Yes, sir, that is possible." But her tone made clear she did not believe it any more than he did. Stone watched her for a long moment. This woman with her careful movements and her distinctive gaze. This supposed communications specialist who saw tactical details that most operators would miss. "You are here for communications equipment, Captain. Let the shooters handle tactical assessment." "Yes, Master Chief." She walked out without another word. Stone stayed behind, staring at that thermal imagery, staring at the 8th heat signature, staring at window dimensions that suggested the building had been modified for defensive operations. His gut screamed that this mission was compromised, that someone had fed them false intelligence, that a trap was waiting in that compound. But he had orders. He had 3 American hostages who needed rescue. He had a team depending on him to lead them through whatever waited in the Syrian darkness. So he buried his doubts and prepared for the mission. That was 68 hours ago. Now Stone is 100 meters from the compound, leading his team toward whatever fate awaits them. The breach is minutes away. The answers to his questions are close. Too close. He signals the team forward. They flow through the final approach, weapons ready, nerves taut with the particular tension that precedes combat. Walsh moves to the door with the breaching charge. 12 pounds of precisely shaped explosive designed to open reinforced barriers without bringing down structures. Stone counts down silently. 3, 2, 1. The charge detonates. The door disintegrates inward. The team flows through the opening in perfect tactical sequence and finds nothing. Room 1, empty. Furniture staged to look lived in. A table with plates arranged as if people had recently eaten there. But the dust tells the truth. No one has touched this place in days. Room 2, same story. Blankets arranged on cots. Food containers scattered around. Water bottles half empty. But everything is too perfect, too arranged, like a movie set designed by someone who had never actually lived in a combat zone. Stone feels the wrongness hit him like a physical blow. Where are the hostages? The words have barely left his mouth when the world explodes. Automated weapons open fire from hidden positions in the walls. Not aimed fire, suppressive fire, designed to drive them into specific killing zones where pre-registered weapons can cut them down. Ambush! Fall back! But the entrance they came through erupts in secondary explosions. Charges rigged to seal them in the moment they breached. The doorway collapses in a cascade of concrete and rebar, blocking their retreat. And through the shattered windows, Stone sees what no satellite imagery ever showed. 300 ISIS fighters, emerging from underground positions that did not appear on any map, from buildings that should have been empty, from everywhere. This was never a hostage rescue. This was a trap, a kill box designed specifically for them. Stone makes the only decision possible. 3rd room, reinforced walls, defensive position, move. The team fights through the chaos with the discipline that separates professionals from amateurs. Walsh drops 2 fighters with precision headshots, his weapon finding targets with the automatic certainty of 14 years of combat experience. His 3rd shot catches a fighter who was flanking left, center mass, the impact spinning the man into the wall. Mitchell grabs Torres and drags him toward cover, her hands already moving to assess the wound. Torres is screaming, the sound raw and primal, his leg torn open by shrapnel that caught the femoral artery. Blood pumps in rhythmic spurts that match his heartbeat. Without immediate treatment, he will bleed out in minutes. Dalton provides covering fire as the team collapses toward the designated room. His weapon chatters in controlled bursts, disciplined three-round groups that conserve ammunition while maintaining suppressive effect. A fighter goes down, then another. But there are too many of them. For every one that falls, two more appear. They pile into what was once a chemical storage vault. The walls are concrete, half a meter thick, built to contain potential explosions during the Soviet era. A single doorway provides the only ground-level access. Windows near the ceiling are too narrow for attackers to breach, but provide observation of the killing ground outside. It is the best bad option available, a fortress that might hold for minutes, or might become their tomb. Stone counts heads. His voice is steady, controlled, the voice of a leader who refuses to show fear even when fear is the only rational response. 12 operators, all accounted for, all alive. For now, Mitchell is already working on Torres, her hands moving with the desperate efficiency of someone who has fought death before and knows exactly how little time they have. Tourniquet, pressure dressing. The wound is bad but survivable if they can get him to a surgical facility within the hour. They do not have an hour. Ammunition check. Stone keeps his voice level. Report. The numbers come in, each one another nail in the coffin. 23 rounds, 15, 19, 12. The total is 127 rounds, 12 shooters, 300 hostiles outside with more arriving every minute. The mathematics is simple. The mathematics is brutal. The mathematics says they are already dead. Stone keys his radio, keeps his voice steady despite the impossible mathematics. Overlord, this is Reaper 1. We are Winchester on ammunition. Enemy forces estimated 300 plus. Request immediate close air support. Danger close authorization. We need everything you can send. Static crackles, then a female voice, cold, clinical. Reaper 1, Overlord. All air assets currently engaged supporting Operation Righteous Storm. Earliest KAS window is 4 hours. I say again, 4 hours. Acknowledge. 4 hours. The silence in the room is absolute. Every man processes what they have just heard. 4 hours against 300 enemies with 127 rounds. They have maybe 10 minutes before the enemy breaches their position. Walsh explodes first, fear transforming into rage. Why the hell is she even here? He points at Elena. She is going to get us killed. She is not even a shooter. She is a desk jockey who probably cannot hit a target at 10 meters. More voices join in. The anger of helpless men finding a target for their fear. I heard she failed basic twice. Dead weight. Should have left her at the fob. Elena says nothing. She sits in the corner of the room, head down, staring at the floor. Small, silent, everything they expect her to be. Stone watches her. The sounds of the enemy outside grow louder. Shouts in Arabic. The clatter of weapons being prepared. The diesel rumble of vehicles bringing reinforcements. 10 minutes, maybe less. And then Elena looks up. Her eyes meet his across the room. But there is something else in those eyes now. Something that Stone recognizes because he has felt it himself in moments of absolute crisis. It is not fear, it is not resignation, it is calculation. Assessment. The cold analysis of a tactical mind identifying options that others cannot see. In that moment, Marcus Stone sees Wraith looking back at him. The same absolute calm in the face of impossible odds. The same patient certainty that transcends fear, because fear is simply another obstacle to be overcome. The same distinctive gaze that has haunted his memories for 3 decades. 31 years collapse into a single instant. Stone is 27 again, watching a ghost step out of the Mogadishu shadows. He is 43, burying his wife and wondering if he should have left the service when she asked him to. He is 58, kneeling in a Syrian compound with the weight of 12 lives on his shoulders and the certainty that he has failed them all. And he is all of those men at once. Watching the woman in the corner, the woman everyone dismissed as worthless, the woman who moves like water and sees what others cannot see. He reaches into the pocket of his tactical vest and touches the metal patch he has carried for 31 years. The edges are worn smooth from handling. The symbol has been traced by his fingers so many times that he could draw it blindfolded. Wraith's voice echoes in his memory, clear as the day it was spoken. You will know them when you see them. They will move like water through stone. They will see what others miss. They will have eyes like mine. Outside, 300 fighters prepare for final assault. Inside, Stone realizes that his debt to a ghost is finally coming due. And Elena Carter, the woman everyone dismissed as dead weight, the technical specialist who failed basic training twice, the quiet presence they had mocked and ignored for 68 hours, holds secrets that will either save them all or confirm their deaths. The siege has begun. Outside, 300 fighters prepare to storm their position. Inside, 12 warriors count their final bullets and make peace with the probability of death. But in the corner of that concrete room, a woman with distinctive gray eyes sits perfectly still, her mind racing through calculations that none of them can follow, seeing paths through the darkness that none of them can imagine. She is the successor Wraith promised would come. She is the ghost that Stone has spent 31 years searching for. She is the answer to questions he did not know he was asking. And in the next few minutes, she will reveal herself. The real mission, the one that will expose truths buried for 3 decades and secrets hidden even deeper, is just beginning. The concrete walls of the chemical storage vault held the cold of decades. Soviet engineers had built this room to contain disasters, to keep toxic spills from spreading into the Syrian soil. They had designed it to survive explosions, to withstand the force of chemical reactions gone wrong, to protect the workers outside from the horrors that might erupt within. Now it served as a tomb for 12 American warriors, and the only disaster it contained was the slow mathematics of their extinction. Master Chief Marcus Stone leaned against the wall, his weapon held loosely in hands that had killed more men than he could remember. The round count had dropped to 89 in the last exchange, 89 bullets against 300 enemies, 7 rounds per man, give or take, assuming perfect accuracy and zero suppressive fire. The numbers did not lie. The numbers said they were already dead. Across the room, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell worked on Ryan Torres with the desperate efficiency of someone fighting a battle she knew she could not win. The tourniquet had slowed the bleeding from his femoral wound, but Torres needed surgery. He needed blood transfusions. He needed things that did not exist in this concrete box in the Syrian desert. He had maybe 2 hours. They all had maybe 10 minutes. Outside, the sounds of the enemy grew louder. Diesel engines rumbling, commands shouted in Arabic, the metallic symphony of 300 weapons being prepared for the final assault. Stone's eyes moved to the corner of the room where Elena Carter sat motionless. She had not spoken since the ambush, had not moved except to breathe. She simply watched the room with that distinctive gaze, her mind working behind a mask of perfect stillness. He knew those eyes, he had seen them before. And as he watched her, as the seconds ticked toward their collective doom, Stone felt the past reaching up to claim him. Memories he had buried for 31 years clawed their way to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. The memories began in a different desert, in a different time, when Marcus Stone was young enough to believe that skill and courage could overcome any obstacle. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, January 1992. Stone was 26 years old, 2 years into his career with SEAL Team 6, already marked for advancement, already recognized as one of the finest operators of his generation. His superiors had selected him for a special training program, 3 months of instruction in techniques that did not appear in any manual, taught by instructors who did not officially exist. He reported to a building that was not on any base map, showed credentials to guards who wore no unit patches, and descended 3 floors below ground level into a facility that the United States government would deny existed if anyone ever asked. His instructor was waiting in a room that contained nothing but mats on the floor and fluorescent lights that hummed with electrical indifference. The man was 32 years old, medium height, medium build, brown hair cut military short. Nothing remarkable about his appearance except the way he stood, perfectly balanced, perfectly still, like a predator waiting for prey to make the first move. And his eyes, gray like winter storm clouds, cold and absolute. My name is not important. The man's voice carried no warmth, no introduction, no attempt at connection. You will call me Wraith. For the next 3 months, I will teach you things that will keep you alive when everything else fails. You will not ask questions. You will not take notes. You will learn by doing, or you will fail. Stone had nodded, too disciplined to show the uncertainty he felt. Good. Wraith had moved then, a single fluid motion that covered the distance between them faster than Stone's eyes could track. One moment the man was 3 meters away. The next moment his hand was at Stone's throat, not squeezing, just resting there with the casual certainty of someone demonstrating absolute control. Your instincts told you to step back. Your training told you to block. Both responses would have gotten you killed. Stone had not even seen him move. That was the first lesson. There would be hundreds more. For 3 months, Stone lived in that underground facility. He slept in a bare cell that contained nothing but a cot and a footlocker. He ate meals that were nutritionally optimized but tasted like cardboard. He trained for 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, pushing his body and mind beyond limits he had never known existed. The curriculum was unlike anything Stone had experienced in SEAL training. SEAL training broke men down and rebuilt them as warriors. This training took warriors and transformed them into something else entirely, something that existed in the spaces between shadow and light. He learned to move without sound, not the relative quiet that standard special operations taught, but absolute silence. The kind of silence that came from understanding how sound propagated through different environments and positioning the body to create no vibration at all. He practiced walking on gravel until he could cross 20 meters without displacing a single stone. He practiced moving through dried leaves until he could navigate an entire forest floor as quietly as a thought passing through an empty mind. He learned to read environments through acoustic signatures. The way sound bounced off walls told you room dimensions. The echo pattern of a dropped coin revealed floor composition. The subtle difference in air pressure between rooms indicated whether doors were open or closed, whether windows were sealed or cracked, whether spaces contained people or stood empty. He learned to anticipate patterns before they emerged. Human behavior followed predictable rhythms. Guards walked beats that their bodies remembered even when their minds grew bored. Patrols developed habits that created vulnerabilities. Everything alive operated on patterns, and patterns could be read, predicted, exploited. Wraith was a brutal instructor, unforgiving, relentless. He demanded perfection in every movement, every calculation, every decision. Failure was met not with punishment, but with repetition. Stone would perform the same exercise hundreds of times until his body understood the correct motion at a cellular level, until conscious thought became unnecessary because the skill had been encoded in muscle and bone. When Stone made mistakes, Wraith did not yell. He simply demonstrated the correct technique again, his movements carrying a precision that made Stone's efforts look clumsy by comparison. The silent demonstration was more devastating than any verbal criticism could have been. It showed Stone exactly how far he had to go. But Wraith was also the finest operator Stone had ever encountered. His skills transcended anything Stone had imagined possible. Wraith moved through space like water through sand. His awareness extended in all directions simultaneously, processing threats and opportunities with a speed that seemed supernatural, but was simply the result of training most people could not imagine. He could enter a room and within 2 seconds identify every threat, every exit, every tactical advantage. He taught Stone to do the same. And once, only once, Wraith spoke about something personal. It was near the end of the 3 months. Stone had just completed an exercise that required him to navigate a simulated hostile environment blindfolded, using nothing but sound and spatial memory. He had succeeded, barely, and Wraith had offered the closest thing to praise he ever gave. Acceptable. You are learning. They had been walking back to the main facility when Wraith spoke again, his voice carrying something Stone had never heard before, something almost human. I have a daughter, 5 years old. She lives with her mother in Texas. I have not seen her in 8 months. Stone had said nothing, afraid that any response would stop the unexpected flow of words. She will never know what I do, what I am. Her mother tells her I am a soldier who works far away, which is true enough. When I die, there will be no funeral with military honors. No flag folded and presented to a grieving widow. No recognition that I ever existed. Wraith had stopped walking. His distant gaze had looked at something far away, something Stone could not see. But maybe if she is strong enough, if she inherits what I have, someday she will understand. Someday she will find her way to this world, and she will know that her father was not absent by choice. He was absent because some duties require everything, including the things we love most. Then the moment had passed. Wraith's expression had hardened back into its usual mask, and he had never spoken of personal matters again. 3 months later, Stone completed the training and returned to his regular unit. He never saw Wraith again until Mogadishu. Until that distinctive gaze emerged from the chaos of Bakara Market and saved his life. Until Wraith pressed a metal patch into his hand and walked back into hell to die. Stone touched the patch now, feeling its familiar weight through the fabric of his tactical vest. 31 years he had carried it. 31 years he had searched for the successor wraith promised would come. And now she sat 10 feet away from him, silent and still, waiting for something only she could see. A 5-year-old girl in Texas, born in 1987 if Stone's math was right, 37 years old now, the same age as Elena Carter. The same distinctive gaze, the same impossible stillness, the same ability to read a room in 2 seconds and map every threat within it. Stone felt the weight of 31 years pressing down on him. The debt he had carried since Mogadishu, the obligation to find Wraith's successor and pass on the symbol of a legacy, was about to be paid. But first, he needed to be certain. The memories shifted, different time, different place, different perspective. West Texas, summer of 1994. The sun hammered down on the small house at the edge of town, turning the air thick and heavy with heat that shimmered off the asphalt roads. Inside, the window air conditioning unit fought a losing battle against the temperature outside, its steady hum providing the soundtrack to another long summer day. Elena Carter was 7 years old, and she knew that something was wrong with her family. Other children had fathers who came home from work at 5:30 and ate dinner at the kitchen table and watched football on Sunday afternoons. Other children had complete photo albums that documented birthday parties and Christmas mornings and summer vacations at beaches with names Elena had only seen in magazines. Other children had stories. Elena had silence. Her mother worked at the county library, shelving books and helping elderly patrons find large print editions of mystery novels. She was quiet and kind and carried a sadness that she tried to hide but could not quite conceal. Sometimes Elena would catch her mother staring at nothing, her eyes focused on some distant point that existed only in memory, her hands frozen in the middle of tasks that her mind had abandoned. Other children had fathers who tucked them in at night. Elena had a mother who sometimes forgot to say goodnight because she was lost in a grief that had no name. Your daddy was a soldier. Her mother had told her this dozens of times, always with the same careful phrasing, always with the same distant look in her eyes that suggested she was reciting words she had practiced rather than speaking from the heart. He loved you very much. He died protecting our country when you were very young. But there was no grave to visit on Memorial Day, no medal hanging on the wall beside the family portraits, no folded flag in a display case that Elena could touch when she wanted to feel close to the father she had never known. No letters from the Department of Defense expressing condolences for sacrifice. It was as if her father had never existed at all. Elena learned early to stop asking questions. The questions made her mother cry. The questions led to conversations that circled back to nothing. The questions only emphasized the emptiness that no answer could fill. So she watched instead. She observed. She paid attention to the small details that most people overlooked, training herself to read the world the way some children learn to read books. Her mother kept a locked box in the back of her closet. Elena had discovered it when she was 5, exploring while her mother was at work. The box was metal, fireproof, secured with a combination lock that Elena could not crack no matter how many numbers she tried. She knew the box contained answers. She could feel it with the certainty of a child's intuition, that sense of knowing that adults learn to ignore but children still trusted. For 7 years, Elena watched that box. Watched her mother open it late at night when she thought Elena was asleep. Watched the way her mother's shoulders shook with silent sobs as she looked at whatever was inside. Elena was patient. She could wait. The summer she turned 14, her patience was rewarded. Her mother had been sick, a fever that kept her in bed for 3 days, leaving Elena to manage the house and care for her as best she could. On the second day, while bringing soup to her mother's bedroom, Elena noticed the closet door was open, and the lockbox sat on the floor, lid raised, contents visible. Her mother was asleep, breathing the shallow breaths of fever dreams. Elena set down the soup and knelt beside the box. Inside was a photograph. The man in the image wore black clothing with no insignia, no unit patches, no name tape, nothing that identified him as belonging to any branch of any military service. He stood in front of a concrete wall, his posture relaxed but alert, his hands loose at his sides in the manner of someone who could turn relaxation into violence in a fraction of a second. His eyes were gray like storm clouds, cold and sharp. Elena touched the photograph with trembling fingers. This was her father. She knew it with absolute certainty, even though she had no conscious memory of his face. Something in her recognized something in him, a connection that transcended memory, that existed in blood and bone and the architecture of DNA. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting she did not recognize, two letters and a date. TC 1993, the year she turned 6, the year her father disappeared. Elena heard her mother stir and quickly replaced the photograph in the box, closed the lid, retreated to the doorway with the soup in her hands as if she had just arrived. But the image of that distinctive gaze stayed with her, and that night, looking in the bathroom mirror, she saw the same eyes looking back. 3 days later, when her mother had recovered, Elena asked the question she had been holding since she could form words. "Mom, who was Dad really?" Her mother had frozen. The coffee cup in her hand trembled, sending small ripples across the dark surface. "I told you, honey, he was a soldier." I saw the picture. In the box. The cup shattered on the floor. Her mother did not seem to notice. She simply stared at Elena with an expression that combined terror and relief and a grief so deep it seemed bottomless. The truth came out in fragments between sobs over hours that stretched into the night. Thomas Carter had been a ghost, a man who did not officially exist, who served his country in ways that could never be acknowledged. He had met Elena's mother in college, before he was recruited into a program so classified that even saying its name was a federal crime. They had fallen in love. They had married in secret. They had conceived a daughter who was never supposed to exist. He came home when he could. Her mother's voice was raw from crying. Sometimes for a day, sometimes for a week. He would appear without warning and disappear the same way. I never knew where he went or what he did. I only knew that every time he left, there was a chance he would not come back. What happened to him? October 1993, I got a visit from a man in a suit. No name, no identification. He told me Thomas was gone, that he had died in service to his country, that I would never know the details and I could never speak of his existence to anyone. "Mom." Her mother had looked at her then with eyes red from tears and shadowed by years of carrying a secret too heavy for one person to bear. "He loved you so much, Elena. Every time he came home, he spent every moment with you, reading to you, playing with you, teaching you things." She had paused, her voice breaking. "He said once that you had his eyes, that you saw things the way he did. He said that if you were strong enough, someday you would find your way to his world, and you would understand why he had to leave." Elena had processed this with the strange calm that comes when the universe finally makes sense. The hollow space in her chest did not fill, but it changed shape. It became something she could carry instead of something that carried her. Her father had been a warrior, a ghost, a man who gave everything for his country, including the family he loved. And if she was strong enough, someday she would follow the path he had walked. The years that followed were shaped by that night. Elena excelled in school, not just academically, but in ways that her teachers could not quite categorize. She solved problems before they were fully explained. She anticipated questions before they were asked. She read people with an accuracy that made them uncomfortable, seeing through lies and evasions as if they were glass. She failed at things too. Physical education was a constant struggle. Her small frame did not lend itself to the athletic achievements that schools valued. She could not run as fast or jump as high or throw as far as her classmates. But she could watch, she could wait, she could observe patterns that others missed. At 18, she joined in the army, not because she wanted to be a soldier in the conventional sense, but because the military was the closest path she could find to her father's world. She hoped that somehow, somewhere in the labyrinth of classified programs and secret operations, she would discover what he had been. Basic training was brutal. Her body was not built for the demands the drill sergeants placed upon it. She failed the obstacle course twice, her arms too weak to pull herself over walls that larger recruits scaled with ease. She needed waivers signed by 3 different officers just to graduate. But she succeeded in other ways that her instructors could not ignore. Her scores on spatial reasoning and pattern recognition tests were unprecedented. She processed environmental information with a speed and accuracy that the psychologists had never seen. She completed tactical simulations in times that should have been impossible, her mind mapping paths through problems that stumped operators with years more experience. The psychologists wrote reports. The reports went up the chain of command. The chain of command connected to people who existed in the spaces between official organizations. 3 months after basic training, Elena received orders to report to a facility in Nevada that did not appear on any map. The man who met her there was 57 years old, silver hair cut military short, eyes that held the weight of decades of secrets. Colonel James Morrison, call sign Patriarch. Do you know why you are here, Miss Carter? No, sir. Morrison had studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Your aptitude scores triggered an alert, specifically your spatial reasoning and pattern recognition metrics. They are unprecedented. In 30 years of evaluating candidates, I have seen numbers like yours exactly once before. Elena had waited, saying nothing. In 1985, when I evaluated a young man named Thomas Carter for recruitment into a program called Sierra, the name hit her like a physical blow. Thomas Carter, TC, her father. Morrison had continued, his voice gentle but relentless. Your father was one of the finest operators Sierra ever produced. He developed techniques that are still used today. He trained a generation of ghosts who changed the course of the Cold War without ever firing a shot. He died in Mogadishu in 1990, buying time for a team of SEAL operators to reach extraction. Elena had found her voice. You knew him. I recruited him. I trained him. I sent him on the mission that killed him. Morrison's expression had shifted, showing a crack in the professional mask. And I have carried that weight for 12 years, wondering if his sacrifice was worth the lives he saved. Was it? That is not for me to decide. Morrison had straightened, reassembling his composure. What I can tell you is this. You have inherited your father's gifts, the same spatial awareness, the same pattern recognition, the same ability to see what others cannot see. If you choose to walk the path he walked, Sierra will train you. You will become what he was. Elena had processed this for a long moment. The hollow space in her chest, the emptiness she had carried since childhood, suddenly had a shape and a purpose. What was his call sign? Morrison's eyes had glistened with something that might have been tears. Wraith. Your father's call sign was Wraith. And if you complete this training, if you become what Sierra can make you, your call sign will be Phantom, the ghost of a ghost, the continuation of a legacy that began before you were born. Elena had not hesitated. When do we start? The memories dissolved as gunfire erupted outside the concrete walls. Stone snapped back to the present, his weapon rising automatically, his body reacting before his mind had fully caught up with the transition from memory to reality. The enemy had begun probing attacks, testing their defenses, searching for weak points in the perimeter. Walsh and two others returned fire through the narrow windows, their shots careful and measured, conserving ammunition they could not afford to waste. 89 rounds dropped to 76. 76 rounds against 300 enemies. Stone looked at Elena. She had not moved during the firefight, had not flinched at the sound of bullets striking concrete. She simply sat in her corner, watching, waiting, her sharp gaze processing information that he could only imagine. He made his decision. Crossing the room, Stone knelt beside her, putting his body between her and the rest of the team. The others were focused on the enemy outside. They would not hear what he needed to say. Captain Carter. His voice was low, barely audible above the sporadic gunfire. I need to ask you something. She looked at him with that steel gaze, the eyes he had seen in Mogadishu 31 years ago. What is your father's name? The question hung in the air between them. Stone watched her expression, looking for the reaction that would confirm what he already knew. Elena's mask did not crack, but something shifted behind her eyes, a recognition, an understanding that this conversation had been inevitable since the moment she stepped off that helicopter 68 hours ago. Why do you ask? Stone reached into his tactical vest and withdrew the metal patch, the symbol that Wraith had pressed into his hand in Mogadishu, the inheritance he had carried for 3 decades, waiting for the moment when he would finally understand who it belonged to. He held it out so she could see. 31 years ago, a man gave this to me. He said I would know his successor when I met them. He said they would have eyes like his. Elena looked at the patch. Her expression did not change, but Stone saw her breathing quicken slightly. A micro-reaction that most people would miss, but that he had been trained to recognize. He had a daughter, Stone continued, 5 years old when he told me about her, said she lived in Texas with her mother. Said he hoped she would be strong enough to find her way to his world someday. The silence stretched between them. Outside, another burst of gunfire. Inside, the slow drip of blood from Torres's wound onto the concrete floor. When Elena finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that belied her calm exterior. Thomas Carter. My father's name was Thomas Carter. His call sign was Wraith. Stone felt 31 years of waiting collapse into a single moment of absolute certainty. He saved my life. Stone's voice was thick with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. Mogadishu, October 1993. My team was trapped. 50 hostiles between us and extraction. He appeared from nowhere and led us to safety. Then he went back alone to buy us time. Elena's eyes glistened, the first crack in her mask that Stone had ever seen. I was 6 years old when he died. I did not learn the truth until I was 14. I did not understand what he was until Sierra recruited me 8 years ago. Stone held out the patch. He gave me this, told me to give it to his successor, said they would understand what it meant. Elena reached out and took the medal from his hand. Her fingers traced the same symbol her father had worn, the same symbol that represented a legacy of ghosts stretching back 4 decades. I understand. Her voice was barely a whisper. He trained me, even though he was not there, even though I never knew him. Everything I am, everything Sierra made me, started with him. Stone felt the debt he had carried for 31 years finally lift from his shoulders. Not because it was paid, but because it had transformed into something else. A connection, a bond, the shared weight of a legacy that transcended individual lives. Your father saved 12 men in Mogadishu, 12 men who went home to their families because he chose to stay behind. I have lived 31 years on borrowed time. Every mission I have completed, every operator I have brought home safe, every victory I have achieved exists because your father gave me the chance to achieve it. Stone reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. Now I am going to help you complete his legacy. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. We are getting out of this compound together, and I am going to see you become everything he hoped you would be. Elena looked at him, father's eyes in daughter's face. The same steel, the same determination, the same absolute certainty in the face of impossible odds. I know how to get us out. Her voice had changed. The soft uncertainty of her cover identity was gone, replaced by the cold command of someone who had spent 8 years learning to navigate impossible situations. But you need to trust me. All of you. Stone nodded. Tell me. There is a drainage tunnel 43 meters northeast of this position. Pre-2003 construction, Ba'athist-era infrastructure. The enemy does not know about it because they are foreign fighters who do not understand Syrian engineering. I mapped it using subsurface acoustic imaging during our approach. Stone processed this. The technical capabilities she described were beyond anything in standard special operations. But she was not standard special operations. She was Sierra. She was Wraith's daughter. How do we reach it? I will show you. But first I need to address the team. They need to understand what I am. Stone hesitated. The reveal would change everything. The men who had mocked her, dismissed her, blamed her for their situation would have to confront the reality of who she actually was. But there was no other way. Do it. Elena stood. The movement was fluid, economical, carrying none of the hesitation she had displayed for the past 68 hours. She walked to the center of the room where the team had gathered, their attention momentarily diverted from the enemy outside. Walsh spoke first, his voice carrying the familiar edge of contempt. Captain, we do not have time for whatever this is. Unless you have a magic solution to 300 hostiles in 76 rounds, sit down and stay out of the way. Elena looked at him with that distinctive gaze, the eyes she had inherited from a ghost. I have a solution, Chief Petty Officer Walsh. But first, you need to understand something about who I am. She moved then, a single fluid motion that crossed the distance between them faster than Walsh could react. One moment she was 3 meters away. The next moment, her hand was at his throat, not squeezing, just resting there with the casual certainty of absolute control. Exactly the way Wraith had demonstrated to Stone 31 years ago. Walsh's eyes went wide. His training told him to counter, to break the grip, to respond with violence. But his instincts told him something different. His instincts told him that this small woman could kill him before he completed the first motion of any response. My name is Elena Carter. Her voice carried to every corner of the room. My father was Thomas Carter, call sign Wraith. He was a Sierra program operator who spent 10 years behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. He died in Mogadishu in 1990, saving the lives of 12 American warriors. She released Walsh and stepped back, her movement carrying the same impossible fluidity. I have spent 8 years training in the same program that created him. I have completed 91 successful operations across 4 continents. My call sign is Phantom, and tonight I am going to get every one of you out of this compound alive. The silence that followed was absolute. Walsh stared at her, his hand touching his throat where her fingers had rested. Mitchell had stopped working on Torres, her eyes fixed on Elena with an expression of dawning understanding. The other operators looked at each other, processing the revelation, recalculating everything they thought they knew. Stone stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of 22 years of command. His words were not just information. They were endorsement, testament, the weight of 3 decades of experience thrown behind a woman half his age. She is telling the truth. I was one of the 12 men her father saved in Mogadishu. I watched him walk back into a firefight to buy us time. I watched him fight against impossible odds so that we could reach the helicopters. And I have spent 31 years carrying the knowledge that I lived because he died. He paused, letting the words sink in. The operators were listening now, really listening. The hostility had drained from their faces, replaced by something more complex. Uncertainty, reassessment, the dawning recognition that they had fundamentally misjudged someone. I have known since the moment I saw her that she was not what her cover suggested. The way she moved, the way she scanned that mess hall, the way she noticed the thermal discrepancy in the briefing that the rest of us missed. He looked at Elena with an expression that combined respect and something almost paternal, but I needed to be certain. He looked at the patch in Elena's hand, the symbol of Sierra, the inheritance that had finally found its rightful owner. Her father gave me that patch 31 years ago. He pressed it into my hand on a street in Mogadishu, surrounded by bodies of men he had killed to save us. He said I would know his successor when I met them. He said they would have his eyes. Stone's voice grew thick with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. Emotion that decades of professional discipline had taught him to suppress. But some moments demanded honesty, even from men who had built their lives on secrets. Tonight, I am telling you what I know with absolute certainty. This woman is the finest operator I have ever seen, and if we want to survive the next 10 minutes, we follow her lead. Walsh found his voice. The contempt was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect, struggling against years of conditioned skepticism. The drainage tunnel. How do we reach it? Elena turned to face the team. Her expression carried the cold focus of someone who had already mapped every obstacle between them and survival. We move in 3 groups, 30-second intervals. I will create a diversion that draws enemy attention to the south approach while you move northeast. The tunnel entrance is concealed beneath debris that looks undisturbed. I will guide you there. And you, Mitchell asked? How do you create a diversion against 300 fighters? Elena almost smiled. The expression was there and gone so quickly that Stone nearly missed it. The same way my father did in Mogadishu. I become something they cannot see, cannot predict, cannot stop. I buy you the time you need, and then I follow you through the tunnel. Stone shook his head. Your father died creating that diversion. Elena met his eyes, father's eyes in daughter's face. My father did not have the training I have. Syria has evolved in 30 years. I know techniques he never learned, capabilities he never developed. I can do what he did and survive. Stone wanted to argue, wanted to forbid her from taking the same risk that had killed her father. But he looked at that steely gaze, at the absolute certainty it held, and he understood that argument was pointless. She was Wraith's daughter. She had inherited more than his eyes. She had inherited his willingness to sacrifice everything for the lives of those she was protecting. Tell us what you need. Elena nodded. The briefing that followed was precise, efficient, comprehensive. She described patrol patterns she had observed during their approach. She explained acoustic signatures that revealed enemy positions. She detailed timing windows that would give them the best chance of reaching the tunnel undetected. When she finished, the team looked at her differently. The woman they had dismissed as dead weight had become something else entirely. A weapon, a legacy, the ghost of a ghost. Stone touched her shoulder one final time. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of 31 years of waiting, the weight of a debt that could never truly be repaid but could be acknowledged. The weight of a legacy passing from one generation to the next. Your father would be proud. His voice was rough with emotion. What you have become, what you are about to do. He would look at you and see everything he hoped you would be. Elena's eyes glistened, the only emotion she would allow herself before the mission began. The only crack in the armor that had protected her through 8 years of operations in the darkest corners of the world. I know, that is why I have to do this. Not just for the team, not just for the mission, for him. Outside, the enemy prepared for final assault. The sound of their preparations echoed through the concrete walls, a symphony of violence waiting to begin. Commands in Arabic, engines revving, weapons being loaded and locked. Inside, 12 warriors prepared to follow a ghost through the darkness. They checked their remaining ammunition. They tightened their gear. They looked at the small woman who stood in the center of the room and saw not the dead weight they had mocked for 68 hours, but something else entirely. A legacy, a weapon, the continuation of a sacrifice made 31 years ago on a dusty street in Mogadishu. The blood debt that Stone had carried for 31 years was about to be paid. The ghost of Thomas Carter was about to fulfill his final mission through the daughter he had never had the chance to watch grow up. But the cost of that payment was still unknown, and the night was far from over. The silence that followed Elena's revelation lasted exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds that stretched into eternity as 12 warriors processed the impossible truth that had been hiding among them for 68 hours. 4 seconds in which every assumption they had made, every dismissive comment they had uttered, every moment of contempt they had directed toward the small woman in the corner came crashing down around them like the walls of a condemned building. Derek Walsh was the first to speak. His voice carried none of the contempt that had defined his interactions with Elena since she stepped off the helicopter at Ford Operating Base Kurd 6. The arrogance that had seemed welded to his personality was gone, stripped away by the revelation that the woman he had mocked was something beyond his understanding. The dismissiveness had evaporated like morning mist under a desert sun. What remained was something rawer, more honest. The voice of a man confronting the magnitude of his own misjudgment and finding himself smaller than he had ever imagined. The drainage tunnel. You said 43 meters northeast. How certain are you? Elena turned to face him. Her posture had transformed in the moment since her revelation in ways that went beyond the physical. The slight hunch of her shoulders that had made her appear smaller and less threatening was gone. The downcast eyes that had avoided direct contact with the operators around her had lifted, revealing the steel-gray gaze that had been hiding in plain sight. The careful movements designed to appear uncertain and overwhelmed had been replaced by the fluid economy of motion that marked Sierra operatives. She stood now with the easy confidence of someone who had spent 8 years mastering skills that most special operators could not imagine existed. Skills passed down from her father. Skills that connected her to a legacy of ghosts stretching back 4 decades. Completely certain. I mapped the subsurface infrastructure during our approach using acoustic resonance imaging. The tunnel is intact, structurally sound, and connects to a wadi system that has been dry for approximately 6 months based on erosion patterns I observed in the satellite imagery during mission prep. Walsh processed this. His tactical mind, honed by 14 years of combat operations, was already running calculations. Distance to the tunnel, time required to reach it, enemy positions, patrol patterns, the mathematics of survival. The enemy has 300 fighters out there. Even if we reach the tunnel entrance, they will see us moving. They will cut us down before we cover half the distance. Elena almost smiled. The expression flickered across her face so quickly that only Stone, watching her with the intensity of a man seeing a ghost made flesh, noticed it. That is why I will create a diversion. Stone stepped forward. His voice carried a warning that came from 31 years of carrying the weight of Wraith's sacrifice. Your father created a diversion in Mogadishu. He did not survive it. Elena met his eyes. Gray steel meeting weathered granite. 2 generations of warriors connected by blood and debt and the shared understanding of what duty demanded. My father did not have the training I have, Master Chief. Sierra has evolved significantly in 3 decades. The techniques I learned build upon his legacy, but they go far beyond what he knew. I can do what needs to be done and survive. Stone wanted to argue. Every instinct he possessed screamed that he was about to watch history repeat itself, that he was about to see another Carter walk into impossible odds and pay the ultimate price. But he also understood something that transcended instinct. He understood that Elena had inherited more than her father's eyes and his skills. She had inherited his will, his determination, his absolute certainty that some things were worth dying for. And no amount of argument would change her mind. Tell us the plan. Stone's voice was steady, controlled, accepting. What do you need from us? Elena nodded. The brief exchange had communicated everything that needed to be said. She turned to address the entire team, her voice carrying the cold precision of a battlefield commander. The enemy is concentrated in three primary positions. First, a blocking force of approximately 100 fighters covering the main approach to the south. Second, a reaction force of approximately 120 fighters staged behind the western wall, prepared to reinforce wherever we attempt to break out. Third, a command element of approximately 80 fighters controlling the assault from the northern rooftop positions. She knelt and began drawing in the dust of the concrete floor. Her hand moved with photographic precision, creating a tactical diagram that matched the terrain outside with perfect accuracy. Their disposition reveals standard ISIS tactical doctrine. They expect us to attempt a breakout through one of the obvious exit points. They have concentrated their forces accordingly, leaving secondary approaches lightly covered. She indicated a section of her diagram. The northeast sector has only rotating patrols, two-man teams on 7-minute cycles. There is a 90-second window between patrol rotations when the approach to the tunnel entrance is completely unobserved. Walsh studied the diagram. That window is not long enough to move 12 people, one of them wounded, 43 meters across open ground. Correct. Elena's voice carried no emotion. That is why I will extend the window. How? By giving them something more interesting to focus on. She stood, brushing dust from her hands. I will infiltrate the southern blocking force and create chaos. Explosions, gunfire, the appearance of a major breakout attempt from a position where no breakout is occurring. Their reaction force will commit to the south. Their command element will redirect attention. And for approximately 4 minutes, the northeast sector will be virtually undefended. Stone's jaw tightened. You are talking about inserting yourself into a position surrounded by 100 enemy fighters. 220. Elena's correction was matter of fact. The reaction force will converge on my position as well. That is the point. The room fell silent again. Every operator present understood the implications of what she was proposing. She was not describing a diversion. She was describing a sacrifice. Mitchell spoke for the first time. Her voice carried the particular weight of someone who had spent 12 years pulling wounded warriors back from the edge of death. Captain Carter. Elena, how do you extract yourself after creating this diversion? What is your exit strategy? Elena looked at the combat medic with something approaching respect. Mitchell had asked the question that mattered, the question that would determine whether this plan was tactical brilliance or elaborate suicide. The confusion I create will work both ways. The enemy will be disorganized, their command structure disrupted, their attention fractured. I will use that confusion to disengage and follow you through the tunnel. The same techniques that allow me to infiltrate their position will allow me to extract from it. And if you cannot disengage, Mitchell pressed, then you continue to the extraction point and complete the mission. My life is not more valuable than 12 others. Stone felt the words hit him like physical blows. He had heard similar words 31 years ago, spoken by a man with those distinctive eyes moments before that man walked back into hell. No, his voice cut through the room with the authority of command. I am not accepting that. Elena turned to face him. Master Chief, I watched your father make that choice. I watched him walk away from the extraction helicopters to buy us time. I have carried that weight for 31 years. Stone's voice cracked with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. I will not carry the same weight for his daughter. The two warriors stared at each other across the dusty concrete floor. Around them, the other operators watched in silence, witnessing a confrontation that transcended rank and tactics and touched something deeper. Something that connected generations of warriors through bonds of sacrifice and debt. Elena's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Master Chief Stone, Marcus, you did not let my father die. You survived so that his sacrifice would mean something. Every mission you have completed in 31 years, every operator you have brought home, every life you have saved exists because he chose to give you that chance. She stepped closer to him. If I do not come back tonight, that will not be a failure. It will be a continuation. His legacy, your legacy, the legacy of everyone who has ever chosen to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. Stone felt moisture gather in the corners of his eyes. He had not cried since his wife's funeral 5 years ago, had not allowed himself the vulnerability of tears in decades of warfare. But something about this moment, about this woman who carried her father's eyes and her father's will, broke through defenses he had spent a lifetime constructing. Your father said something to me before he walked away. Stone's voice was barely above a whisper. He said that someday I would meet his successor, that I should remember what he was about to do, that ghosts do not die, they simply pass on what they know. Elena nodded. She had heard this story before, in the classified archives of Sierra program, in the oral histories that operators passed down through generations. He was right. Ghosts do not die, but that does not mean we have to accept death when survival is possible. She placed her hand on Stone's shoulder, reversing the gesture he had offered her minutes before. I am going to create the diversion. I am going to buy you the time you need. And then I am going to follow you through that tunnel and prove that my father's legacy is not just about sacrifice. It is about excellence. It is about doing the impossible and surviving to do it again. Stone looked into her steady gaze and saw something he had never seen in Wraith's gaze. Her father had carried the weight of certain death when he walked back into Mogadishu. He had known he would not survive. He had made peace with that knowledge. Elena carried something different. She carried the absolute certainty of someone who had trained for 8 years to navigate impossible situations. She carried the confidence of 91 successful operations. She carried the belief that she could do what her father had done and live to tell the story. Stone made his decision. Walsh, you take point on the extraction. Get the team to that tunnel entrance the moment the diversion begins. He turned to Mitchell. Lieutenant, can Torres make it 43 meters if we move fast? Mitchell looked at the wounded operator. Torres was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were alert. The tourniquet had bought him time, but that time was running out. If we move fast, very fast, I can keep him stabilized for maybe another hour. After that, he needs surgery or he dies. Then we move fast. Stone turned back to Elena. You have command of the diversion operation. What do you need from us? Elena's expression shifted into pure tactical focus. The emotional moment had passed. What remained was the cold calculation of a Sierra operative preparing for impossible odds. Ammunition. Whatever you can spare. I will need enough rounds to create the impression of a major engagement. The team began redistributing their remaining ammunition. Stone gave up 10 rounds. Walsh contributed 8. The others added what they could. When the count was finished, Elena had 43 rounds. 43 bullets to create chaos among 220 enemies. It would have to be enough. And one more thing. Elena's voice carried a weight that made everyone stop moving. The tone had shifted from tactical briefing to something more personal, more dangerous. There is something you need to know about Victor Langston, about why this mission was compromised from the beginning. Stone felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. The sensation was primal, instinctive, the response of a body that had survived 2 decades of combat by recognizing threats before the conscious mind could process them. He had suspected treachery since the thermal signatures did not match the briefing. He had known that someone had set them up, but he had not yet connected the dots to their intelligence officer, to the man who had stood at the front of that briefing room and delivered lies with the confidence of truth. Langston fed us false intelligence deliberately. Elena's voice was flat, clinical, the voice of someone delivering facts rather than accusations. The 8 thermal signatures I identified during the briefing were not imaging errors. They were evidence of a modified structure, a trap that had been prepared specifically for this team. This entire mission was designed as a kill zone, not by ISIS, by someone inside the Department of Defense who wants Sierra program eliminated. The revelation landed like a bomb in the enclosed space. The concrete walls seemed to press inward as the implications sank into 12 warriors who had trusted the intelligence they were given. Walsh took a step forward, his fists clenching at his sides, the muscles in his jaw tightening with fury. You are saying our own people will set us up? Our own goddamn intelligence officer tried to get us killed? Yes, but there is more. Elena paused and something flickered behind her eyes. Something that looked almost like pain, almost like grief, the shadow of a family tragedy that had shaped her entire life. Victor Langston is not just a traitor to his country. He is my uncle, my father's younger brother. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that exists in the moment between lightning and thunder, when the world holds its breath waiting for the explosion to come. Stone felt the pieces falling into place. Langston's brother Thomas, the operator who died in 1993, the loss that had changed Victor, made him harder, made him obsessive. Thomas Carter, Wraith, Elena's father. Victor Langston was Wraith's brother. Your uncle, Stone's voice was hollow. The man who set this trap is your family. Elena nodded. Her expression had hardened into something cold and remote. My father and Victor were close growing up. When my father was recruited into Syria in 1985, Victor was 17 years old. He idolized his older brother, wanted to follow him into special operations. But he did not have the aptitude for Sierra. He went into military intelligence instead. She paused, her gaze distant, seeing something that existed only in memory and classified files. When my father died in Mogadishu, Victor was told that Thomas had been abandoned by his chain of command, that extraction assets were available but were not deployed, that his brother died because the military establishment did not value his life enough to save it. Stone felt cold wash through him. That was not what happened. The extraction was there. Your father chose to stay behind. I know, but Victor does not. Elena's voice carried the weight of family tragedy. For 31 years, my uncle has believed that the system murdered his brother through negligence and indifference. He has devoted his career to exposing what he sees as corrupt and unaccountable programs that sacrifice operators for political convenience. And Sierra program is at the top of his list. Stone understood now. The target was never the DevGru team. It was Elena. It was Sierra. Correct. Victor learned of my existence approximately 2 years ago. He discovered that his brother had a daughter, that the daughter had been recruited into the same program that killed Thomas, that the legacy of the brother he lost was being perpetuated through the niece he never knew. Elena Dias' steely gaze met Stone's. This trap was designed to accomplish two objectives. First, force me to reveal Sierra capabilities on official record, providing ammunition for congressional oversight committees that want to shut down classified programs. Second, if possible, eliminate me entirely. End the Carter legacy once and for all. Walsh found his voice. The anger in it was directed not at Elena, but at the betrayal she had revealed. He is your uncle, your father's brother, and he tried to kill you. He does not see it that way. Elena's voice carried something that might have been sadness buried beneath layers of professional detachment. In his mind, he is avenging his brother. He is preventing the same system that killed Thomas from destroying more lives. He genuinely believes he is doing the right thing. That is insane. Mitchell spoke with the directness of someone who had spent years dealing with the consequences of other people's decisions. He set up 12 American operators to die. He fed false intelligence that got us trapped in a kill zone. How can he possibly justify that? Because in his mind, exposing Sierra program is worth any cost. Even American lives. Even his niece's life. Elena shook her head slowly. Grief does strange things to people. It can transform love into obsession, loyalty into betrayal. My uncle loved my father. That love became hatred directed at everyone he holds responsible for Thomas's death. Stone processed this revelation with the tactical mind that had kept him alive through 22 years of special operations. The information changed nothing about their immediate situation. 300 enemies still surrounded them. They still had limited ammunition. They still needed to reach that drainage tunnel. But it changed everything about the larger picture. This was not a random ambush. This was a carefully orchestrated attack on Sierra program, executed by someone with access to classified operations and the motivation to destroy everything Elena represented. Does Langston know who you are? Stone asked. Does he know you are his niece? Elena hesitated. I am not certain. He knows Elena Carter exists. He knows she is a Sierra operative. But whether he has connected me to the Captain Carter on this mission, I cannot say. My cover identity is thoroughly documented. Even someone with his access would need to dig deeply to uncover the connection. If he knows, this becomes more complicated. Stone's tactical mind was already running scenarios. If he does not know, we might be able to use that. Elena nodded. After we extract, I intend to confront him. I want to look into his eyes and tell him the truth about how my father died. I want him to understand that his 31 years of hatred have been based on a lie. The weight of her words settled over the room. This was not just a mission anymore. This was family. This was legacy. This was the collision of grief and duty and the terrible things people do in the name of love. Stone made his decision. We execute the plan as discussed. Elena creates the diversion. We move to the tunnel, and when we get back to base, we deal with Langston together. He looked at Elena with an expression that combined determination and something almost paternal. I was there when your father made his choice. I should have been the one to tell your uncle the truth 3 decades ago. I owe you both that much. Elena studied him for a long moment. The connection between them had deepened through the course of this conversation. They were no longer just commander and operative. They were partners in a legacy that stretched back 31 years and forward into an uncertain future. Thank you, Master Chief. Stone nodded. Now give us the detailed brief. Every step, every timing, every contingency. Elena began laying out the tactical plan with the precision of someone who had conducted 91 successful operations. Her voice was calm, methodical, professional. But beneath the clinical delivery, Stone could sense something else. Determination. The determination of a daughter about to honor her father's legacy. The determination of a ghost about to prove that ghosts could survive. The detailed briefing took 7 minutes. 7 minutes that felt like hours as the enemy outside continued their preparations for the final assault. Elena described patrol patterns she had memorized during their approach. She explained acoustic signatures that would indicate when specific positions were vulnerable. She outlined timing windows that offered their best chances of success. The operators listened with the focus of professionals who understood that their lives depended on every detail. Walsh asked clarifying questions about the route to the tunnel. Mitchell inquired about medical considerations for moving Torres. The others absorbed the information and prepared themselves mentally for what was coming. When the briefing concluded, Elena looked at each member of the team in turn. I know most of you thought I was dead weight when this mission started. You had every reason to believe that. My cover identity was designed to appear exactly as weak and unprepared as you assumed I was. She paused, letting the acknowledgement settle. What happens in the next few minutes will require absolute trust. You need to trust that I know what I am doing. You need to trust that the path I have identified is viable. You need to trust that when I tell you to move, you move without hesitation. Walsh stepped forward. His posture had changed completely from the aggressive intimidation he had projected for the past 68 hours. The linebacker build that had seemed designed to dominate and overwhelm now carried itself differently. He stood now with the bearing of a warrior addressing an equal, a veteran operator acknowledging someone who had earned respect through demonstration rather than rank. Captain Carter, I owe you an apology. The words came out rough, unpracticed. Walsh was not a man who apologized often. His world was built on certainty and dominance and the absolute conviction that he was right. Admitting error did not come naturally. Elena raised an eyebrow slightly, the only acknowledgement of her surprise. The mess hall. The tray. Walsh's voice carried genuine remorse, the kind that only emerged when a man truly understood the magnitude of his mistake. I did that deliberately, not by accident. I aimed my elbow. I timed it perfectly. I wanted to establish dominance. I wanted to show you where you stood in the hierarchy. I wanted to break you down before the mission so you would stay in your lane and not interfere with operators who knew what they were doing. He paused, his jaw working as he forced out words that his pride wanted to swallow. It was petty. It was unprofessional. It was the act of a bully who thought he knew everything and knew nothing. I regret it more than I can say. Elena considered him for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of 68 hours of contempt and dismissal. Her father had taught her, through the classified training videos she had watched hundreds of times during her Sierra preparation, that the measure of a warrior was not how they behaved when they were winning. It was not how they carried themselves in triumph. It was how they behaved when they recognized they had been wrong, when they had to look their mistakes in the eye and acknowledge them before someone they had wronged. You did what you thought was necessary to protect your team, Chief Walsh. Your assessment of me as a potential liability was reasonable given the information you had. My cover identity was designed to appear exactly as incompetent and unprepared as you assumed I was. I do not hold that against you. Walsh shook his head. That is not good enough. I treated you like an obstacle instead of an asset. I let my assumptions override my judgment. He extended his hand. If we survive this, I want to learn from you. I want to understand how you do what you do. Elena took his hand. Her grip was firm, confident, the grip of someone who had earned respect through demonstration rather than demand. If we survive this, I will teach you what I can. My father believed that the purpose of Sierra was not to create elite individuals. It was to elevate everyone we worked with, to share techniques that could save lives. The handshake ended, but something had shifted in the dynamic of the room. The team was no longer 12 operators plus one unwanted attachment. They were 13 warriors preparing to face impossible odds together. Stone watched the exchange with something approaching hope. He had seen teams fracture under pressure, had seen missions fail because personal conflicts overrode professional discipline. What he was witnessing now was the opposite. A team coming together in the crucible of crisis, putting aside grievances and assumptions to focus on the only thing that mattered. Survival. Check your gear. Stone's voice carried command authority. We move in 3 minutes. The operators began final preparations, weapons checked, ammunition redistributed. Torres stabilized as much as possible for rapid movement. Elena moved to the doorway, pressing her ear against the concrete wall, listening to sounds that no one else could hear. Her eyes closed as she processed acoustic information, building a real-time map of enemy positions from nothing but vibration and echo. Stone approached her quietly. You said your father was not trained as thoroughly as you were. What did Syria teach you that he never learned? Elena opened her eyes. Her expression was focused, distant, her mind operating on multiple levels simultaneously. Advanced acoustic analysis, subsurface mapping, biomechanical optimization that allows more efficient movement at lower energy costs. She paused. And something else, something that changed everything. What? Hope, Elena's voice carried unexpected weight. The operators who trained during the Cold War learned to accept death as the price of mission success. They were prepared to sacrifice themselves because that was what the mission required. She looked at Stone with those gray eyes that held so much of her father. Sierra program evolved. We learned that sacrifice should be the last option, not the first. We learned that the best operators are the ones who survive to operate again. Stone felt something shift in his chest. For 31 years, he had carried the image of Wraith walking back into Mogadishu to die. He had assumed that sacrifice was the defining characteristic of Sierra operators, that their willingness to give everything, including their lives, was what made them exceptional. But Elena was telling him something different. She was telling him that Sierra had learned from the sacrifices of the past, that her father's death had taught the program to value its operators differently. Your father died so that we could live. Stone's voice was thick with emotion, and Sierra used his death to learn how to keep others from dying the same way. Elena nodded. His sacrifice was not wasted. It changed how we think about mission planning, about risk assessment, about the value of operator survival. She looked toward the doorway, toward the chaos waiting outside. Tonight, I'm going to prove that his legacy is not about dying for the mission. It is about living to complete it. Stone reached out and gripped her shoulder one final time. Then prove it. Come back alive. Elena almost smiled. That is the plan, Master Chief. The moment ended as Walsh announced that the team was ready to move. 12 operators stood prepared for the most dangerous extraction of their lives. Torres was supported between Mitchell and another operator, his wounded leg elevated as much as possible. Elena moved to the front of the group. Her small frame seemed almost inadequate for the responsibility she carried, but her eyes told a different story. Gray steel, cold certainty, the absolute focus of someone who had trained for 8 years for exactly this kind of moment. Remember the timing. Her voice carried to every corner of the room. When you hear the first explosion, count to 30. Then move. Do not stop for anything. Do not look back. Get to that tunnel entrance and get inside. She looked at Stone. I will see you on the other side. Before anyone could respond, she was gone, flowing through the doorway like smoke, disappearing into the Syrian darkness. Becoming the ghost she had been trained to be. The team watched her vanish. Walsh spoke first. His voice carried something that sounded almost like awe. Did anyone else see how she moved? She was there, and then she just was not. Stone nodded. That is what Sierra creates. Operators who can become invisible in plain sight. The waiting began. Seconds stretched into eternities. Every sound from outside carried potential meaning. Every shadow might contain 300 enemies preparing for the final assault. Stone counted his heartbeats. Each one brought them closer to the moment when Elena's diversion would begin. Each one carried them towards salvation or destruction. Around him, the operators waited with the disciplined patience of professionals. They had been trained to endure uncertainty, to maintain focus during the interminable periods between action. But this waiting was different. This waiting carried the weight of knowing that a single woman was out there, somewhere in the darkness, preparing to challenge 220 enemies alone. 1 minute passed, then 2. Stone began to wonder if something had gone wrong, if Elena had been discovered, if the plan had failed before it began. And then the night exploded. The first blast came from the southern perimeter, a massive detonation that lit the darkness like artificial dawn, casting shadows that stretched and twisted across the compound like the fingers of giants reaching for the sky. The explosion was not random. It was precisely placed, calculated to create maximum confusion while minimizing the risk of structural collapse that might endanger Elena herself. Then gunfire. Sustained, aggressive, the sound of a major engagement erupting exactly where Elena had said it would. The rhythm of the shots told a story to anyone trained to listen. Controlled bursts, disciplined spacing, the signature of a single shooter creating the impression of multiple combatants through tactical positioning and timing. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Commands in Arabic echoed across the compound, voices sharp with urgency and confusion. Engines roared to life as vehicles mobilized toward the sound of battle. The thunderous movement of 200 fighters converging on the sound of combat created a symphony of chaos that drowned out all other sounds, exactly as Elena had planned. "Start counting." Stone's voice cut through the chaos with the authority of 22 years of command. 30 seconds. Then we move. The team pressed against the walls, muscles coiled, nerves singing with the particular tension that preceded explosive action. Every operator was ready to launch into motion the moment the count completed. Outside, the sounds of Elena's diversion grew more intense. More explosions bloomed in the darkness. More gunfire crackled through the night air. The desperate symphony of a one-woman war against impossible odds created cover that would have been impossible to manufacture any other way. Stone counted the seconds in his mind. Each number brought them closer to the moment of commitment. Each heartbeat carried them towards salvation or destruction. 25. The gunfire intensified. Stone could hear the enemy forces in complete disarray, their command structure overwhelmed by the chaos Elena was creating. 26. More explosions. The southern perimeter was fully engaged now. Every fighter in the compound focused on the threat that seemed to be emerging from that direction. 27. Stone gripped his weapon tighter. The moment was almost upon them. 28. Beside him, Walsh was coiled like a spring, ready to lead the team toward the tunnel entrance. 29. In the distance, Stone could hear vehicles moving, reinforcements converging on Elena's position. She was drawing the entire enemy force toward herself, creating the window they needed. 30. Move! The team exploded from the concrete shelter and into the Syrian night. Walsh led the way, his weapon up, his eyes scanning for threats that Elena's diversion should have drawn away. His movements were fluid, professional, the product of 14 years of combat operations. Behind him came the others, moving in tactical formation, carrying Torres between them, racing toward the tunnel entrance that meant salvation. Mitchell kept one hand on Torres's shoulder, monitoring his condition even as they moved at maximum speed across the open ground. Stone brought up the rear, his weapon covering their retreat, his ears straining for any sound of enemy response. But the sounds of battle remained concentrated to the south, where Elena fought alone against 220 fighters. She was doing exactly what she had promised. She was giving them the time they needed. The tunnel entrance appeared exactly where she had said it would be, concealed beneath debris that looked undisturbed but yielded to Walsh's probing hands. The opening was narrow, dark, unknown, and it was their only chance. One by one, the operators disappeared into the tunnel. Walsh first, his weapon leading the way into the darkness. Then the team carrying Torres, moving as quickly as they could with the wounded operator between them. Then the others, one after another, vanishing into the earth. Stone was last. He paused at the entrance, looking back toward the sound of battle. The gunfire was still intense. The explosions still punctuated the night. Flames had begun to rise from several positions, casting orange light across the compound. Elena was still fighting, still buying them time, still proving that her father's legacy was about more than sacrifice. Stone whispered a prayer to a God he was not sure he believed in anymore. A prayer for the ghost who was fighting alone in the darkness. A prayer that history would not repeat itself. A prayer that he would not have to carry another Carter's death for the rest of his life. Then he descended into the darkness. Following his team toward whatever waited on the other side. Behind him, the battle continued. The sounds of Elena's war against impossible odds echoed across the Syrian desert, growing fainter with every step Stone took into the tunnel. And somewhere in that chaos, a ghost fought alone, proving that her father's legacy was not about sacrifice. It was about survival. It was about excellence. It was about doing the impossible and living to tell the story. The tunnel swallowed the sounds of battle. Darkness enveloped the team like a living thing as they pushed forward through the narrow passage, guided by nothing but touch and instinct, in the desperate hope that Elena had been right about where this tunnel led. Stone counted heads by touch and sound, confirming that everyone had made it into the tunnel. His hands moved across shoulders and backs, his ears catching the breathing of each operator. 12 warriors, all accounted for, all moving forward through the darkness. One ghost still fighting above ground. They pushed forward into the unknown, trusting Elena's assessment that this tunnel would lead them to safety, trusting that she had been right about everything else, trusting that somewhere behind them, she was finding her way out of the chaos she had created. The sounds of battle faded as they moved deeper underground. The explosions became distant rumbles. The gunfire faded to nothing. The silence that replaced it was absolute, broken only by the sound of their own footsteps and breathing. And the weight of waiting for Elena's return settled over Stone like a physical burden. He had watched her father walk away 31 years ago. He had carried that memory for 3 decades. Now he walked through darkness, praying that history would not repeat itself, praying that the ghost would find her way home. The Syrian night swallowed Elena Carter whole. She moved through this darkness, and with the fluid precision of water finding its path through stone, every step calculated, every motion economical, every breath controlled. The chaos she had created at the southern perimeter continued to draw enemy attention, but she knew the window would not last forever. 300 fighters, 220 of them converging on her diversionary position. The remaining 80 spread across the compound in overlapping fields of fire. 43 rounds in her weapon. The mathematics was impossible, but Elena Carter had spent 8 years learning to make the impossible routine. She flowed between buildings like smoke, using shadows that seemed insufficient for concealment but proved perfect when combined with her training. Sierra had taught her that invisibility was not about physical hiding. It was about understanding how human attention worked, how eyes tracked movement, how brains processed threat information. Become what the enemy expects to see, and they will look right through you. She became a shadow among shadows, a piece of darkness in the dark. The first enemy patrol appeared at the corner of a half-collapsed structure. 2 fighters, young, nervous, their weapons sweeping arcs that left gaps Elena could have driven a truck through. They were focused on the explosions to the south, on the apparent breakout attempt that had drawn their comrades into a killing ground. They never saw her coming. Elena moved between them like a blade between ribs. Her hands found pressure points that Patriarch had spent months teaching her to locate by touch alone. The first fighter crumpled without a sound, his nervous system overwhelmed by targeted strikes that shut down motor control before his brain could register pain. The second turned at the soft thump of his companion hitting the ground. But by then Elena was already behind him, her fingers finding the cluster of nerves at the base of his skull. 2 down, 298 remaining. She stripped their weapons of ammunition, 6 magazines between them, 30 rounds per magazine, 180 additional rounds added to her 43. The mathematics improved slightly, still impossible, but less impossible than before. Elena continued moving. The compound was a maze of Soviet-era construction, concrete blocks and rusted metal, and the accumulated debris of decades of neglect. She had memorized the layout from satellite imagery during mission prep, but the reality was different from the photographs. War had reshaped this place, adding craters where explosions had struck, removing walls where firefights had torn through, creating a labyrinth of shadow and danger. She used the labyrinth, made it her weapon. A group of 5 fighters emerged from a building ahead, responding to commands shouted in Arabic from the northern command position. They moved in tactical formation, weapons ready, eyes scanning for the threat that had disrupted their carefully prepared ambush. Elena let them pass, let them move beyond her position, let them commit to a direction before she struck from behind. The suppressed pistol she had concealed in her pack made almost no sound. 3 shots, 3 bodies falling before the remaining 2 could turn. Then she was among them, moving too fast to track, her hands and elbows finding targets with the precision of a surgeon and the force of a sledgehammer. 7 down, 293 remaining. The sounds of battle at the southern perimeter were fading. The enemy was beginning to realize that the breakout attempt had been a feint. Soon they would regroup, Soon they would begin systematic sweeps of the compound. Soon the window she had created would close. Elena needed to buy more time. She moved toward the northern command position. The 80 fighters controlling the assault from the rooftop positions were the key. Take out the command element, and the enemy forces would lose coordination. Their response would become chaotic rather than systematic. Cass favored the ghost. The building was 3 stories tall, built during the Soviet era to house the administrative functions of the chemical processing facility. The external walls showed damage from coalition airstrikes, but the structure remained largely intact. Guards at the ground floor entrance. More guards on each floor. The command element on the roof, directing operations through radio communications. Elena studied the building for exactly 12 seconds. Her mind processed entry points, guard positions, structural weaknesses, timing intervals. Patriarch had trained her to conduct this kind of assessment in her sleep, to build tactical models from fragmentary information and execute against them with perfect confidence. She found her path. The eastern wall had sustained damage that left a gap in the concrete too small for most people to squeeze through. Elena was not most people. She had spent months learning to compress her body through spaces that seemed impossible, to dislocate joints temporarily when necessary, to flow through gaps that physics said should stop her. She squeezed through the hole and emerged into a storage room filled with rusted chemical containers. The air was thick with the smell of decay and abandoned industry. She moved through it like a ghost, leaving no footprints in the dust, disturbing no debris that might betray her passage. The stairwell was guarded, 2 fighters at the base, 2 more on the landing between the first and second floors. Elena could hear their breathing, smell the cigarette smoke that clung to their clothes, sense their positions through the vibrations they created in the concrete structure. She climbed the exterior of the building instead. Her fingers found holds in the damaged concrete, her body flowing upward with a biomechanical efficiency that defied conventional understanding of human movement. Sierra training had rewired her nervous system, optimized her muscle recruitment patterns, taught her to use her body in ways that most people would consider impossible. She reached the second floor window in 43 seconds, slipped through without a sound, found herself in a corridor filled with sleeping fighters, men who had been resting before their shift on the perimeter. 18 enemies in the corridor, all asleep, all vulnerable. Elena moved through them like death itself, silent, precise, absolute. She did not kill them all. She did not need to. She simply ensured that they would not wake up for several hours using pressure point techniques that induced deep unconsciousness without permanent damage. The Sierra program did not create mindless killers. It created precision instruments. Every action calibrated for maximum effect with minimum collateral consequence. She reached the rooftop access in 90 seconds. The door was guarded from the inside, but the guards were focused outward, watching for threats approaching from below. They did not expect the threat to come from within their own building. Elena burst through the door with controlled violence. Her first shots took down the guards before they could raise their weapons. Her second shots disabled the radio equipment that connected the command element to the forces below. Her third shots dropped the commander himself, a bearded man in his 40s who died with an expression of absolute surprise on his face. The rooftop fell silent. Elena stood among the bodies, breathing hard for the first time since the operation began. The command element was destroyed. The enemy forces below would receive no more coordinated instructions. The chaos she needed was assured, but she was not finished. She moved to the edge of the roof and looked down at the compound below. Enemy fighters were milling in confusion, responding to the loss of command authority with the disorganization she had anticipated. Some continued toward the southern perimeter. Others had stopped, uncertain of their orders. A few had begun sweeping the compound, searching for the threat that had disrupted their operations. Elena had maybe 5 minutes before they found the bodies on the rooftop. 5 minutes before the chaos transformed into focused rage directed at finding and destroying whoever had done this. She needed to reach the tunnel, needed to follow her team to safety, needed to extract from this chaos before it consumed her. She descended from the roof using the same route she had climbed. The building's exterior offered sufficient handholds for someone with her training. She reached the ground in 18 seconds, dropping the last 3 meters and rolling to absorb the impact, and ran directly into a patrol of 6 fighters. They were more alert than the others, more disciplined. They saw her immediately, weapons rising, voices shouting alarm in Arabic. Elena did not hesitate. She moved into them before they could fire, closing the distance so fast that their rifles became liabilities rather than assets. Her knife appeared in her hand, a blade she had carried since graduation from Syria, its edge honed to molecular sharpness. Close quarters combat was different from the silent takedowns she had performed earlier. This was violent, messy, desperate. 6 fighters against 1 woman, all of them larger, all of them stronger, as all of them armed. None of them trained like she was trained. The first died before he understood the fight had begun. The second managed a single wild shot that missed her by centimeters before her blade found his throat. The third and fourth went down together, victims of strikes too fast to see and too precise to survive. The fifth managed to grab her arm, his grip crushing, his weight bearing down on her smaller frame. Elena used his momentum against him, flowing with the force rather than fighting it, redirecting his strength into a throw that sent him crashing into his final companion. Both went down. Neither got up. Elena stood in the aftermath, chest heaving, blood that was not her own dripping from her blade. The sounds of the compound had shifted around her, voices were shouting her position. Footsteps were converging from multiple directions. They knew where she was. The window was closing. Elena ran. The tunnel entrance was 80 meters away. 80 meters of open ground, of cross angles and kill zones and enemies converging from every direction. She had studied this ground during the approach. She knew where the shadows fell. She knew where the debris provided cover. But knowing was different from doing. She sprinted across the compound, bullets cracking past her head, kicking up dust at her feet, slamming into concrete walls that offered fragmented protection. Her legs pumped with the desperate energy of survival, her lungs burning, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged animal fighting for freedom. 60 meters. A round caught her right shoulder. The impact spun her halfway around, sent pain screaming through her nervous system, threatened to drop her to the ground where she would die within seconds. The bullet had passed through clean, entering below the collarbone and exiting through the back of her shoulder. Blood began spreading across her tactical vest in a dark stain that grew with every heartbeat. Elena did not stop. She compartmentalized the pain the way Patriarch had taught her, acknowledged it, categorized it, set it aside. The wound was not immediately life-threatening. The bullet had missed the subclavian artery. She could function. She could fight. She could survive. She had to survive. 40 meters. More enemies were appearing, drawn by the gunfire, converging on her position. She counted at least 50 fighters visible, with more arriving every second. The chaos she had created was working against her now, concentrating enemy attention on the single threat they could identify. Her. Elena returned fire as she ran. Controlled bursts that forced enemies to seek cover bought her precious seconds of movement. Her accuracy was compromised by the shoulder wound, but her training compensated. Each shot found its mark or came close enough to suppress. 20 meters. The tunnel entrance was visible now. The debris pile that concealed it looked exactly as she had described it to Stone. Safety was within reach. Salvation was 20 meters away. A fighter emerged from behind a concrete barrier directly in her path. His weapon was raised, his aim was steady. He was too close to miss. Elena threw herself into a slide, her body dropping beneath his line of fire as his weapon discharged. The rounds passed over her head close enough that she felt their passage through the air. Her own weapon came up, found its target, fired twice. The fighter dropped. Elena scrambled to her feet and covered the final distance to the tunnel entrance. Her shoulder screamed in protest, her legs trembled with exhaustion. Her ammunition was nearly depleted, but she had made it. She pulled aside the debris that concealed the entrance and dropped into the darkness below. The tunnel swallowed her, embraced her, offered the shelter that she desperately needed. Behind her, the enemy converged on her last known position. But she was gone, vanished into the earth like the ghost she had been trained to become. The tunnel was narrow and dark. Elena moved through it by touch and memory, her wounded shoulder sending waves of pain through her body with every movement. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. She would need medical attention eventually. But first she needed to survive. The tunnel stretched ahead of her, a passage through earth and stone that connected the compound to the Wadi system she had identified from satellite imagery. Her team should be ahead of her, moving toward the extraction point. She had bought them the time they needed. Now she needed to catch up. The sounds of the enemy faded as she moved deeper underground. The chaos above became a distant rumble, then silence. The darkness was absolute, the air thick with the smell of earth and old water, and the particular mustiness of spaces that had been sealed for years. Elena counted her steps, tracked her position against the mental map she had constructed during mission planning. The tunnel should curve left approximately 200 meters from the entrance, then continue straight for another 400 meters before opening into the wadi. She found the curve exactly where she expected it, followed the passage as it turned and straightened. Let her training guide her through darkness that would have paralyzed anyone without her preparation. And then she heard them, voices ahead. Arabic, the unmistakable sound of enemy fighters who had somehow entered the tunnel ahead of her. Elena froze. The enemy had found another entrance, had anticipated her route, had positioned fighters to intercept anyone trying to escape through the drainage system. She counted the voices, 6, maybe 8, between her and her team, between her and survival. Elena assessed her situation with the cold precision of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of moment. Wounded shoulder limiting her mobility, ammunition nearly depleted, 6 to 8 enemies in a narrow tunnel where her advantages in movement would be minimized. The mathematics was brutal, but Elena Carter had never let mathematics determine her fate. She moved forward, slowly, silently, using the darkness as a weapon, letting the absence of light conceal her approach. The enemy fighters had flashlights, beams cutting through the blackness, illuminating sections of the tunnel in harsh white light. The lights were their weakness. They could see where the beams pointed, but nowhere else. Their eyes had adjusted to the illumination, leaving them blind in the shadows between the beams. Elena lived in those shadows. She reached the first fighter without being detected. Her hand covered his mouth before he could scream. Her blade found the junction of neck and shoulder with surgical precision. He died without a sound, his body lowering to the tunnel floor with the careful control of someone who had done this many times before. 7 remaining. The second fighter was 10 meters ahead, his flashlight beam pointed down the tunnel, away from her approach. Elena closed the distance in 3 heartbeats. He joined his companion in death without ever knowing she was there. 6 remaining, but the third fighter turned at the wrong moment. His flashlight swept across her position as she moved between targets. His eyes widened, his mouth opened to shout. Elena threw her knife. The blade covered this distance in less than a second, embedding itself in his throat before the shout could emerge. He collapsed, his flashlight clattering to the ground, the beams spinning wildly before settling against the tunnel wall. 5 remaining. They knew she was there now. The sound of the falling flashlight had alerted them. Voices called out in Arabic, demanding responses that would not come. Weapons raised toward the darkness, toward the threat they could sense but not see. Elena moved again, faster now. The element of surprise was gone, but the advantage of darkness remained. She flowed between positions, staying ahead of the flashlight beams, striking from angles they did not expect. 2 more fell to her hands before the remaining 3 managed to form a defensive cluster, their backs to the tunnel wall, their flashlights and weapons pointed outward in overlapping coverage. Elena stopped, assessed. 3 enemies, good positions, overlapping fields of fire, no blind spots she could exploit. But she did not need blind spots. She had Sierra training. Elena drew her pistol. 3 rounds remaining, 3 enemies. The mathematics was perfect if her aim was perfect. She steadied her breathing, forced her wounded shoulder to stabilize, aligned her sights on the first target with the absolute focus of 8 years of training. 3 shots, 3 enemies down. Elena stood in the aftermath, her weapon empty, her body trembling with exhaustion and blood loss. The tunnel ahead of her was clear. The path to her team was open. She retrieved her knife from the fighter she had thrown it into, searched the bodies for ammunition, and found none that fit her weapons. Pressed a hand against her wounded shoulder and felt the warm pulse of blood that continued to seep through her makeshift dressing. Then she kept moving. The tunnel opened into the wadi system exactly where she had predicted. Dry riverbed, eroded banks, open sky above showing stars that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness underground. And voices, American voices, her team. Elena emerged from the tunnel entrance and found herself looking at 12 weapons pointed directly at her chest. Then Stone's voice cut through the tension. "Stand down! It is her!" The weapons lowered. The operators stared. Elena knew what they saw. A small woman covered in concrete dust and blood. More blood than seemed possible for someone still standing. Gray eyes that burned with exhaustion and pain, and something else. Something that looked like triumph. "You made it," Stone's voice carried wonder and relief, and a dozen other emotions he did not often allow himself to express. We heard the fighting in the tunnel. We thought, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. 60 fighters in this compound. Elena's voice was steady despite everything. 8 more in the tunnel, all neutralized. Stone stared at her. The magnitude of what she had accomplished settled over him like a physical weight. 68 enemies. One woman, 8 years of training that had transformed a mechanic's daughter from West Texas into something that most people could not imagine existed. You are wounded. Mitchell was already moving toward her, medical kit in hand. Let me see the shoulder. Through and through, Elena allowed the combat medic to examine her. Miss the artery. I can function. Mitchell's hands were gentle but professional as she assessed the wound. The bleeding has slowed, but you need proper treatment. This is going to hurt. She began applying field dressings with the efficiency of someone who had treated hundreds of similar wounds. Elena endured the pain without complaint, her gray eyes fixed on Stone. The team continued toward the extraction point. Torres was deteriorating despite Mitchell's best efforts. His leg wound needed surgery within the hour. Every minute they delayed reduced his chances of survival. The wadi stretched ahead of them, a dry watercourse that wound through the Syrian desert toward the emergency extraction coordinates. The MH-60 helicopter would be waiting for them. Safety was within reach. They moved as fast as Torres' condition allowed. Walsh took point, his weapon scanning for threats that should not exist this far from the compound, but might appear anyway. Stone walked beside Elena, his presence a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. The helicopter appeared exactly where it was supposed to be. Guardian 3, the call sign painted on his fuselage, rotors turning in preparation for immediate departure. The crew chief waved them forward, urging speed. They loaded Torres first, then the other wounded, then the rest of the team in tactical order. Elena was last. She paused at the door of the helicopter, looking back at the Syrian desert that stretched toward the compound they had escaped. Somewhere in that darkness, 68 bodies bore witness to what she had done. Her father had died, buying time for 12 Americans in Mogadishu. Tonight, she had honored his legacy by ensuring that 12 more would survive. She climbed aboard. The helicopter lifted off, climbing fast to escape potential ground fire, banking toward the Turkish border and safety beyond. The rotors beat against the night air with a rhythm that seemed to match Elena's heartbeat. Fast, desperate, alive. The door remained open, wind rushing through the cargo bay, carrying away the smell of blood and cordite that clung to everyone inside. The lights of the Syrian landscape fell away beneath them, the compound becoming a distant point of fire and chaos that grew smaller with every passing second. Elena sat against the bulkhead, her shoulder wound throbbing with every heartbeat, her exhaustion pressing down on her like a physical weight. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the impossible was fading now, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made even breathing feel like effort. But she was alive. Her team was alive. The mission, despite the betrayal and the trap and everything that had gone wrong, had succeeded. Torres was receiving emergency treatment from Mitchell, his vital signs stabilizing under her expert care. The other operators sat in silence, processing what they had survived, what they had witnessed, what they now understood about the small woman who had saved them all. Stone moved across the cargo bay and sat beside her. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at her with an expression that combined admiration and something deeper, something that connected generations of warriors through bonds of sacrifice and blood and the shared understanding of what duty truly meant. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible above the rotor noise. I need to tell you something about your father, about how he really died. Elena turned to look at him. Her gray eyes, so like wraiths, held questions she had carried for 31 years. Stone's jaw tightened. The words he was about to speak had been locked inside him for 31 years. They had shaped his life, defined his career, haunted his dreams, and he had never shared them with anyone. Until now, your uncle, Victor Langston, he believes your father was abandoned, that extraction assets were available but were not deployed, that the military establishment let Thomas die because they did not value his life. Elena nodded slowly. She had told the team this during the briefing before her diversion. It was the foundation of Victor's hatred, the engine that drove his 31-year vendetta against Sierra program. He is wrong, Stone's voice cracked with emotion he had suppressed for 3 decades. The extraction was there. The helicopters were on station. We could have taken your father out with us. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. Then why? He chose to stay. Stone's eyes glistened with moisture that the wind from the open door immediately dried. He chose to walk back into that firefight. The extraction was right there. We were loading onto the helicopters, and Thomas looked at me and said that if he left, the militia would follow. They would catch the helicopters on the ground. More men would die. The cargo bay seemed to contract around them. The other operators had fallen silent, listening to a story that none of them had heard before. I tried to argue. Stone continued. Tried to tell him to get on the helicopter. Tried to order him, even though I was not in a position to give him orders. But he just looked at me with those eyes, your eyes, and he said something I have never forgotten. What did he say? Tell them I chose this. Tell them I was not abandoned. Tell them I walked back because that is what we do. We give everything so others can give more. Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. The first tears she had allowed herself since learning the truth about her father at age 14. For 31 years, your uncle has believed a lie. Stone's voice was raw with guilt. I should have told him. I should have found him and explained what really happened. But I did not know who Thomas was. Did not know he had family. Did not know that his brother was out there building a life on false foundations. Elena processed this revelation with the analytical part of her mind, while the emotional part struggled to contain the surge of grief and understanding that threatened to overwhelm her. Her father had not been abandoned. He had not been sacrificed by an indifferent system. He had made a choice. The same choice she had made tonight when she walked back into the compound to create the diversion. The same choice that defined Sierra operators across generations. He chose. Her voice was barely a whisper. He chose to give everything. Stone nodded. He was the bravest man I ever knew. Until tonight. He reached out and placed his hand on her uninjured shoulder. Tonight, you proved that his choice was worth it. 68 enemies, 1 woman, 8 years of training built on the foundation he created. He looked at her with an expression that combined grief for the past and hope for the future. His legacy lives in you, not just his skills, his spirit, his willingness to give everything for the people he serves alongside. The helicopter continued toward the border, toward safety, toward the confrontation with Victor Langston that awaited them at Forward Operating Base Kurd 6. Elena looked out at the darkness passing below. Somewhere in that darkness, her father's bones might still lie in the dust of Mogadishu. He had never received a proper burial, never received the recognition he deserved. His sacrifice had been classified, compartmentalized, buried in files that most people would never see. But she knew now, she understood. And soon Victor Langston would understand too. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Kurd 6 as the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern horizon. Medical teams swarmed the aircraft before the rotors had fully stopped. Their attention focused on Torres and the other wounded. Elena waved away the medics who tried to examine her shoulder. Later, there is something I need to do first. Stone fell into step beside her as she walked toward the Tactical Operations Center. Walsh and Mitchell followed, understanding without being told that something important was about to happen. The TOC was busy with the aftermath of the mission, officers coordinating reports, communications specialists processing intercepts. The controlled chaos of military operations continuing despite the disaster that had nearly claimed 12 American lives. Victor Langston stood at a console, his back to the door, reviewing data on a screen that showed the compound they had just escaped. He did not hear them enter. Elena stopped 10 feet from him. Her voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Victor. He turned. His face registered confusion, then recognition, then something that might have been fear. The intelligence officer who had orchestrated their deaths was looking at survivors he had not expected to see again. Captain Carter. His voice was controlled, but his eyes betrayed him. You made it out. I am relieved. Are you? Elena stepped closer. Her small frame should have seemed unthreatening, but something in her bearing made Langston take a step backward. Are you relieved that your trap failed? That the mission you designed to destroy Sierra program and kill your own niece did not succeed? The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Niece. Langston's face went pale. What are you talking about? Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out the Sierra patch that Stone had given her, the symbol that had passed from Wraith to Stone to her, the inheritance of a ghost. My name is Elena Carter. My father was Thomas Carter, your brother. Call sign Wraith. Langston stared at the patch. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound. The color drained from his face until he looked like a man who had seen his own ghost. No, the word came out as a whisper. That is impossible. Thomas did not have. He did. Elena's voice was cold, precise. The voice of someone delivering facts that would destroy everything the listener believed. He married my mother before he was recruited into Syria. They kept it secret because of his work. I was born in 1987. He died when I was 6 years old. Langston's legs seemed to give out. He sagged against the console behind him, his eyes fixed on Elena's face, searching for something, finding it. Your eyes, his voice was hollow. You have his eyes. Yes, Elena stepped closer still. And I have something else. I have the truth about how he died. The truth you have spent 31 years refusing to believe. Stone moved forward, positioning himself beside Elena. She looked at him and nodded. This was his story to tell. I was there. Stone's voice carried the weight of 31 years of carrying this truth. In Mogadishu, I was one of the 12 men your brother saved. Langston's attention shifted to Stone. His expression was that of a man watching his world collapse around him. The extraction helicopters were on station. Stone continued, We were loading. We could have taken Thomas with us. But he refused. He said that if he left, the militia would follow. They would catch the helicopters on the ground. More men would die. No. Langston shook his head. They told me there was no extraction. They told me the assets were not deployed. They told me he was abandoned. They lied. Or they did not know the truth. Or they told you what they thought would hurt less than the reality. Stone's voice hardened, but I was there. I watched him walk back into that firefight by choice. He chose to sacrifice himself so that 12 men could live. Langston's face crumpled. 31 years of hatred, of conviction, of certainty that the system had murdered his brother through indifference and neglect, collapsed in a single moment. He chose. The words came out broken. He chose to die. He chose to save lives. Elena's voice softened slightly. He chose to honor the commitment that Sierra operators make when they accept their training. He chose to be what he was trained to be. I have spent 31 years, Langston's voice was barely audible. 31 years hating the people who took him from me. 31 years working to expose the programs that I thought had killed him. 31 years. He looked at Elena with eyes that had suddenly aged 20 years. I tried to kill you, my own niece. I tried to destroy everything Thomas believed in, because I could not accept that he chose to leave me. Elena studied her uncle, the man who had orchestrated the death of 12 Americans, the man who had betrayed his country in the name of a vendetta built on lies, the man who was, despite everything, her family. You wanted someone to blame. Her voice carried understanding that surprised even her. Grief does that. It demands a target. You could not accept that Thomas chose to die, so you created villains who forced him into it. Langston said nothing. Tears streamed down his face. The intelligence officer who had planned operations across multiple continents, who had maintained composure through decades of classified work, was weeping openly in front of his colleagues and the niece he had never known. Military police were already moving toward them. Word of Langston's betrayal had spread through the proper channels. He would be arrested, interrogated, prosecuted. His career was over. His freedom was likely forfeit. But Elena did not step aside as the MPs approached. Wait. She moved closer to Langston, close enough to touch, close enough to see every line of grief and regret on his face. My father loved you. She spoke softly enough that only he could hear. He told his instructor during Sierra training that he had a younger brother who idolized him, a brother who wanted to follow him into special operations. He was proud of you, Victor, even though he could never tell you what he did or why he had to leave. Langston's composure shattered completely. He fell to his knees, sobs racking his body, 31 years of rage and grief and misplaced conviction pouring out of him in a flood that seemed endless. Elena knelt beside him. Her hand found his shoulder, the same gesture of comfort that Stone had offered her, that warriors offered each other across generations. He would want you to know the truth. She continued. He would want you to understand that his death was not meaningless. It was the most meaningful thing he ever did. 12 men went home to their families because of his choice. And tonight, 12 more went home because his daughter made the same choice. The MPs waited. Stone watched. The entire TO had fallen silent, witnessing a family reunion 31 years in the making, built on tragedy and betrayal and somehow understanding. I am sorry. Langston's voice was broken. I am so sorry. I know. Elena helped him to his feet. And I think somewhere my father knows too. The MPs took Victor Langston into custody. He went without resistance, his eyes fixed on Elena, until he disappeared through the door, his entire worldview rebuilt in the space of 10 minutes. Elena stood in the aftermath, exhaustion finally claiming her. The wound in her shoulder throbbed. Her legs trembled. The weight of everything she had done and learned pressed down on her like a physical burden. Stone appeared beside her. Medical. Now, that is an order, Captain. Elena almost smiled. Since when does a Master Chief give orders to a captain? Since that captain took a bullet through the shoulder and killed 68 enemies, and then conducted a family intervention instead of getting treated. He placed his arm around her uninjured shoulder and guided her toward the medical facility. Behind them, the sun rose over forward operating base Kurd 6. A new day was beginning, a day that would see reports filed and debriefs conducted in the long process of understanding what had happened in that Syrian compound. But for Elena Carter, the day meant something simpler. She had survived. Her team had survived, and the truth about her father's death had finally been spoken aloud after 31 years of silence. Wraith's legacy was secure. The ghost had passed his torch to the next generation, and Phantom had proven worthy of carrying it forward into whatever darkness awaited. 3 weeks after Syria, the world looked different from the basement of the United States Capitol. The secure hearing room existed in a space that most Americans would never see, buried beneath layers of reinforced concrete and electronic countermeasures. It occupied a realm between the public functions of democracy and the shadowy necessities of national security. No windows allowed light from the outside world. No cameras recorded proceedings that would remain classified for decades. No public record would ever capture what was said within these walls. The room had hosted testimony about operations that shaped history without ever appearing in history books. Presidents had sat where Elena Carter now sat, explaining decisions that the voters who elected them would never understand. Directors of intelligence agencies had detailed programs that officially did not exist. Warriors had described missions that their own families believed were routine training exercises. This was where America did the business it could not do in daylight. 15 senators occupied elevated positions along a curved dais that stretched across the front of the room. The Senate Armed Services Committee, representing the full political spectrum of American governance, had convened in closed session to determine the fate of Syria program. Democrats sat beside Republicans, liberals beside conservatives. The usual partisan divisions that paralyzed so much of American politics had been suspended for this moment. National security had that effect. At the center of the dais sat Senator Margaret Reynolds, 62 years old, steel gray hair pulled back in a style that had suggested efficiency rather than vanity. Eyes that had spent 2 decades looking for accountability in places most people preferred to leave unexamined. She had earned her reputation as a fierce advocate for congressional oversight, a thorn in the side of intelligence agencies that preferred to operate without scrutiny. But her motivation was not political, it was personal. Her husband had died in October 1990, the same month that Thomas Carter had died. The same operation, according to the classified briefing materials she had received. 2 men connected by sacrifice, their widows connected by grief. Their legacies now intertwined in ways neither could have imagined when they married young officers who promised them adventure and delivered heartbreak. Elena sat at the witness table in her dress uniform. The dark blue fabric was pressed to perfection. The oak leaves on her collar denoted her recent promotion to major. The wound in her shoulder had healed enough that she could wear the uniform properly, though the scar tissue beneath would remain for the rest of her life. A permanent reminder of what she had done to save 12 lives in a Syrian compound. Behind her, filling the chairs reserved for supporting witnesses, sat the entire DevGru team from Syria. Stone, Walsh, Mitchell. Torres recovered enough from his leg wound to attend. The others, 12 warriors in dress uniforms, their presence a statement of solidarity that required no words. Senator Reynolds opened the proceedings with the formality that classified hearings demanded. Major Carter, this committee has reviewed extensive documentation regarding your actions in Syria. We have examined the history, structure, and operational mandate of Sierra program. We have consulted with intelligence community leadership, special operations commanders, and legal scholars regarding the constitutional implications of programs that operate beyond standard congressional oversight. She paused, letting the weight of institutional authority settle over the room. What concerns this committee is not your individual competence or dedication. The evidence of both is overwhelming. What concerns us is precedent. Programs that create operatives with extraordinary capabilities, operating under classifications that prevent meaningful oversight, accountable only to a small cadre of officials who may or may not represent the democratic will of the American people. Elena listened without interruption. She had been prepared for this. Colonel Morrison had briefed her on what to expect, on the questions that would be asked, on the concerns that needed to be addressed. But preparation was different from experience. The reality of facing 15 senators who held the future of Sierra program in their hands was something no briefing could fully anticipate. Reynolds continued, Major Carter, please explain to this committee, in your own words, what Sierra program is and what you believe it accomplishes. Elena spoke with the clear precision that 8 years of classified operations had instilled. Senator Sierra program was established in 1985 under President Reagan's administration. Its mandate was to develop tactical infiltration specialists capable of operating in hostile territory with zero support infrastructure. The initial focus was Warsaw Pact nations during the Cold War. The program produced 32 graduates between 1985 and 1995, when it was deactivated following the Soviet collapse. She paused, organizing her thoughts. The program was reactivated in 2015 in response to emerging asymmetric threats. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, terrorist organizations operating in environments where traditional special operations face significant challenges. Since reactivation, Sierra has produced 15 graduates. Those graduates have conducted 311 operations across 4 continents with 0 civilian casualties and 0 operator fatalities. Until Syria, she did not add, until Victor Langston had tried to change those statistics permanently. Senator Reynolds leaned forward. 311 operations with what oversight, Major? Every Sierra operation requires JSOC approval, Senator. Mission planning is reviewed by Special Operations Command leadership. After action reports are filed and examined by appropriate authorities, we operate under the same rules of engagement as other special operations forces. But you operate with capabilities that exceed those forces. Reynolds pressed the point. Capabilities that, according to classified assessments this committee has reviewed, include movement techniques, environmental analysis, and tactical skills that seem beyond standard human parameters. Elena chose her words carefully. That assessment is accurate, Senator. Sierra training takes 4 years. Most special operations training takes 6 months to 2 years. We train longer because we are learning skills that require fundamental changes in how the brain processes environmental information. Explain that in terms this committee can understand. Senator, most people process their environment visually and consciously. They look at a room and see furniture, walls, doors. Sierra graduates are trained to process environments acoustically, spatially, and subconsciously. We hear the dimensions of a room based on sound reflection. We sense structural characteristics through pressure changes. We map terrain through pattern recognition that becomes automatic after thousands of hours of practice. She paused, searching for an analogy that would resonate. It is similar to how a concert pianist can play complex music without consciously thinking about each note. The skills become neurologically embedded through repetitive training until they are as natural as breathing. Sierra does not create superhuman operators. We create operators who have learned to use abilities that exist in all humans but are rarely developed. Another senator spoke, James Corbett, former Army officer, generally supportive of special operations but cautious about classified programs. Major Carter, your after-action report indicates approximately 68 enemy combatants killed during your extraction from the Syrian compound. That is an extraordinary number for a single operator. How do you reconcile that level of lethality with Sierra program's stated emphasis on infiltration rather than combat? Elena met his eyes directly. Senator Corbett, Sierra training emphasizes avoiding combat whenever possible. The purpose of our infiltration techniques is to accomplish objectives without engaging enemy forces. However, when combat becomes unavoidable, we are trained to be decisive. The situation in Syria left no alternative to direct engagement. The enemy had trapped my team. 68 deaths were the cost of ensuring 12 Americans came home alive. Corbett nodded slowly. His expression suggested respect rather than criticism. Senator Reynolds reclaimed the questioning. Major Carter, this committee has heard testimony from Chief Warrant Officer Victor Langston regarding his motivations for compromising your mission. He claims that Sierra program and programs like it operate without meaningful accountability, that operators with your capabilities answer to no one but themselves. How do you respond to that characterization? Elena felt the weight of the question. This was the heart of the matter. This was what would determine whether Sierra survived or died in this hearing room. Before she could answer, movement behind her drew the committee's attention. Master Chief Marcus Stone had risen from his seat. Senator Reynolds, permission to address the committee. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. This was irregular. Witnesses were called in order. Supporting personnel did not simply stand and request permission to speak, but something in Stone's bearing, something in the way he held himself with the authority of 22 years of Special Operations Service made her pause. Master Chief Stone, I understand you were one of the operators rescued in Syria. You have testimony to offer? I do, Senator. Testimony directly relevant to Major Carter's capabilities and to the question of accountability you just raised. Reynolds glanced at her fellow committee members. Several nodded. Very well. Please approach the witness table. Stone walked forward with the measured pace of a man who had spent decades in situations where every step mattered. He took a position beside Elena, not replacing her, but standing with her. A statement of solidarity visible to everyone in the room. Senator Reynolds, members of the committee, I have served in special operations for 22 years. I have led 247 missions across 4 continents. I have worked alongside Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the British SAS, and a dozen other elite units from allied nations. He paused, letting his credentials settle into the record. I have never encountered an operator of Major Carter's caliber. The room was silent. Stone's voice carried the weight of decades. 3 weeks ago, my team was trapped in a Syrian compound. 300 enemy fighters surrounded us. We had 127 rounds of ammunition between 12 shooters. Air support was unavailable. By every tactical measure, we were going to die. He turned to look at Elena. Major Carter saved us. Not through luck, not through circumstance. Through capabilities that I have seen only once before in my life. In her father. Murmurs rippled through the committee. The connection between Elena and Wraith had been established in the classified briefings, but Stone was putting it on verbal record for the first time. Thomas Carter, call sign Wraith, was a Sierra graduate from the original Cold War class. In October 1993, he saved my life and the lives of my team in Mogadishu. He walked back into a firefight alone to buy us time to reach extraction helicopters. He died so that 12 Americans could live. Stone's voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through decades of professional control. For 31 years, I have carried that debt. For 31 years, I have wondered if I could ever repay what Thomas Carter gave me. 3 weeks ago, his daughter gave me the answer. He looked directly at Senator Reynolds. Senator, you asked about accountability. Let me tell you what accountability looks like. It looks like a 37-year-old woman walking into a kill zone with 43 rounds of ammunition and creating enough chaos to allow 12 operators to escape. It looks like her taking a bullet through the shoulder and continuing to fight because her team was depending on her. It looks like her killing 68 enemies, not because she wanted to, but because that was the cost of bringing us home alive. Stone's voice hardened. That is accountability, Senator. Not to congressional committees, not to oversight boards. To the warriors standing beside her. To the mission she accepted. To the legacy of a father who died teaching her what sacrifice means. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Derek Walsh stood, Senator Reynolds, permission to address the committee, and Sarah Mitchell, and Ryan Torres still using a cane to support his healing leg. One by one, the operators from Syria rose. One by one, they asked permission to speak. Reynolds looked at the row of warriors standing in solidarity. Her expression was complex, moved perhaps, certainly surprised. This is highly irregular. Senator, these operators have testimony relevant to the committee's inquiry. Walsh's voice carried parade ground authority. We request the opportunity to provide it. Reynolds conferred briefly with her colleagues. Then she nodded. Very well. You may each make a brief statement. Walsh stepped forward first. The man who had mocked Elena for 68 hours. The man who had deliberately knocked her tray to the floor in the mess hall. The man who had assumed she was dead weight because she did not fit his preconceptions of what an operator should look like. The man who had learned, in the space of a single night, that assumptions could be the most dangerous enemy of all. Senator, I served in special operations for 16 years before the mission in Syria. I have worked alongside the finest warriors America has produced. Delta Force operators, SEAL Team 6, the British SAS, men who have earned their reputations through blood and sacrifice. His voice carried the weight of genuine humility, something that did not come naturally to him. I treated Major Carter with disrespect from the moment I met her. I assumed she was dead weight because she was small and quiet and did not fit my expectations. I deliberately humiliated her in front of my team because I wanted to establish that she did not belong. He paused, his jaw tight with the effort of public confession. I was wrong. Completely wrong. Catastrophically wrong. She is the finest operator I have served with in my entire career. She spotted a sniper that I missed, saving my life. She identified the intelligence compromise that none of us detected. When we were trapped with no hope of survival, she did not panic. She planned. She adapted. She executed with precision that I have never witnessed before. Walsh looked directly at Senator Reynolds, and then she walked into 300 enemies alone so the rest of us could escape. She took a bullet through the shoulder and kept fighting. She killed 68 combatants by herself in conditions that should have been impossible. His voice hardened with conviction. That is not uncontrollable, Senator. That is not unaccountable. That is what exceptional warriors do when the people beside them need saving. That is what service looks like at its highest level. Mitchell spoke next. The combat medic who had kept Torres alive through the extraction, who had treated Elena's shoulder wound in the cargo bay of the helicopter, who had seen more death than anyone should ever see, and still chose to keep fighting for life. Senator, I have been a combat medic for 12 years. I have treated hundreds of wounded operators in conditions ranging from training accidents to full-scale firefights. I have seen courage, and I have seen cowardice. I have seen men break under pressure, and I have seen men transcend their limitations. She paused, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who dealt in life and death. Major Carter is in a category by herself. When she emerged from that tunnel, covered in blood and concrete dust, wounded in the shoulder, having just fought her way through 8 enemies in complete darkness, she waved off medical treatment so she could ensure her team was safe first. Mitchell shook her head slowly. That is not the behavior of an unaccountable weapon. That is the behavior of a leader who puts her people before herself. That is the accountability that matters. Not paperwork, not oversight committees. The accountability of one warrior to another. The testimony painted a picture that no classified briefing could capture. A picture of one woman against impossible odds, of training that transcended normal human capability, of sacrifice and courage in the bonds that form between warriors in the crucible of combat. When the operators had finished, Reynolds sat in silence for a long moment. Her expression had changed during the testimony. The professional skepticism had not disappeared, but something else had joined it, understanding, perhaps. Recognition of something that transcended political categories. Major Carter, Reynolds' voice was softer now. This committee has heard compelling testimony regarding your competence and character. But I have a personal question, if you will permit it. Elena nodded. My husband died in the same operation that killed your father. October 1993. Mogadishu. I have spent 31 years not knowing what happened, not knowing whether his death meant anything, not knowing whether the system that sent him there valued his sacrifice. She paused, and for a moment the senator became simply a widow seeking answers. Can you help me understand? Elena rose from her seat. She walked forward until she stood directly before the dais, close enough that her words would need no microphone. Senator Reynolds, my father chose to die. He had the opportunity to board the extraction helicopter. He chose to stay behind because he believed his death would save more lives than his survival. She held Reynolds' gaze. I cannot speak to your husband's specific circumstances, but I can tell you what Sierra taught me, what my father's sacrifice taught me. The men and women who serve in these programs do so knowing that their deaths may never be acknowledged, that their families may never understand, that the nation they protect may never know they existed. Her voice carried the weight of generations. They serve anyway, not for recognition, not for glory, for the simple belief that some things are worth dying for. Your husband died alongside men who believed the same thing. His sacrifice was not meaningless. It was part of something larger than any individual life. Reynolds was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried emotion she rarely displayed in official proceedings. Thank you, Major Carter. She turned to address her fellow committee members. I have spent 31 years seeking accountability for what I perceived as failures in classified programs. I believed that operations like the one that killed my husband represented systemic problems that required congressional intervention. She paused. Today I have heard testimony that challenges those beliefs, not from politicians protecting their bureaucratic territories, from warriors who were there, from a woman who carries the same loss I carry. Reynolds straightened in her seat. I move that this committee vote to continue Syria program with enhanced oversight provisions as proposed by Major Carter in her preliminary testimony. Quarterly briefings, Inspector General reviews, documentation requirements that balance operational security with institutional accountability. The vote was called 15 senators, 15 votes to continue Syria program. Unanimous. Elena stood in the aftermath, processing what had just happened. The program that had shaped her, that connected her to her father, that represented 4 decades of American excellence in the shadows, would survive. Stone appeared beside her. Your father would be proud. Elena looked at him, the man who had carried her father's memory for 31 years. The man who had finally found the successor Wraith had promised. I know, and so would yours. Stone's expression flickered with confusion. I never knew my father, Elena clarified, but I know he would have been proud of what you became. The operator who honored Wraith's sacrifice by honoring his daughter. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Stone did something he had not done in decades. He embraced her, a brief hug that communicated everything words could not. Welcome to the visible world, Major Carter. It is going to take some getting used to. 6 months later, the world had indeed taken some getting used to. JSOC headquarters at Dam Neck, Virginia, hummed with the particular energy of Special Operations Command. Helicopters on the training grounds, operators moving between buildings with purposeful strides. The infrastructure that supported America's most elite warriors operating with quiet efficiency. Major Elena Carter stood at the front of a briefing room, addressing 16 operators, 12 traditional DevGru personnel, 4 Syria program graduates, including herself, a hybrid unit that represented the future of American special operations. The mission brief covered a hostage rescue in Caracas, Venezuela. American executives kidnapped by a criminal organization with government protection. 48-hour window before the hostages were moved to a location beyond intelligence reach. Elena delivered the briefing with the confidence of someone who had proven herself beyond any reasonable doubt. The operators listened with focus and respect. No questions about her credentials, no doubts about her capabilities. Just professionals receiving orders from a commander they trusted. Stone sat to her right, executive officer, mentor, the bridge between her father's generation and her own. When the briefing concluded, the team dispersed to prepare equipment and review individual assignments. The Caracas operation would launch in 16 hours. Every minute before then had purpose. Mitchell approached Elena as the room emptied. Major, Torres wanted me to tell you his leg is fully healed. He is cleared for operational duty. Elena nodded. Good. I want him on point for the building entry. His instincts are solid and he has something to prove. Mitchell smiled slightly. We all have something to prove, ma'am. That is what makes this unit work. She departed, leaving Elena alone with Stone and the maps that covered the briefing room walls. There is someone outside who asked to speak with you. Stone's voice carried an odd note. Young woman. She said you would know who she was. Elena's curiosity flickered. She walked to the door and stepped into the Virginia afternoon. A young woman stood near the parking area, 23 years old, blonde hair, slight build. She observed the facility with quiet attention, her eyes moving in patterns that Elena recognized immediately. Tactical scan, automatic assessment, the markers of Sierra training. Whisper. The young woman approached. Her movements carried the precise economy that marks Sierra graduates, the fluid grace that most people could not achieve no matter how many years they trained. Major Carter, I am reporting as ordered. Sierra program, class of 2025. I graduated 6 weeks ago. Colonel Morrison said you requested my assignment to your unit. Elena studied her, saw echoes of herself 4 years ago, the same focused intensity, the same quiet confidence that came from knowing capabilities others could not imagine. Colonel Morrison spoke highly of you, said you graduated top of your class. Whisper allowed herself a small smile. I broke your record on the infiltration exercise. By 43 seconds, Elena raised an eyebrow. 11 minutes and 51 seconds. That is impressive. I had the advantage of studying your techniques. You pioneered methods that are now standard curriculum. Everything I learned built on foundations you created. Elena felt something shift in her chest, the weight of legacy settling into a new configuration. She had spent 8 years becoming worthy of her father's memory. Now someone was studying her techniques the same way she had studied his. How many operational deployments? 7. All successful, 0 compromises. Elena nodded slowly. The numbers were good, the bearing was correct. But there was a question that mattered more than statistics. Sierra program has traditionally operated in complete darkness. This unit operates with partial visibility. Command knows what we can do. So do the operators we support. Are you comfortable with that? Whisper considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Major Carter, I joined Sierra because I wanted to serve at the highest level possible. The shadows were part of that service. But I have watched what you accomplished after Syria, testifying before Congress, legitimizing the program, creating pathways for future graduates to operate with institutional support rather than just classification protection. She met Elena's eyes. I would rather be part of building that future than hiding in the past, even if it means being visible. Elena felt something approaching hope. The future of Sierra was not just about her anymore. It was about the operators who would come after, the ghosts who would carry the torch forward into whatever darkness awaited. Report to Master Chief Stone. He will integrate you into the team and brief you on current operational parameters. We deploy in 16 hours. Whisper nodded. Yes, ma'am. She walked toward the building with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Stone emerged and fell into step beside Elena. Think she is ready? She is better than I was at her age. Elena watched Whisper disappear through the doorway. Faster, more refined technique. The program is evolving. Each generation builds on what came before. Stone was quiet for a moment. Your father would be proud. Patriarch would be proud. Hell, everyone who ever wore the Sierra patch would be proud of what you have built here. Elena thought about that, thought about the weight of legacy, thought about the men and women who had served in shadows for 40 years. Their sacrifices unknown, their names forgotten. We are going somewhere before the mission. She made the decision as she spoke it. There is something I need to do. 3 hours later, Elena stood in Arlington National Cemetery. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills of white headstones. Rows upon rows of marble markers stretched toward horizons in every direction, each one representing a life given in service to the nation. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional sound of a distant bugle playing taps for another service, another family saying goodbye to someone they loved. Section 60, where the recent war dead rested beneath simple white headstones, where the warriors from Iraq and Afghanistan lay in eternal formation, their service complete, their sacrifice remembered. Elena walked between the rows with the reverence the place demanded. Each headstone she passed carried a name, a rank, a date. Each one represented a story that would never be fully told, a family that would never be whole again, a future that would never unfold. She understood this place in ways that most visitors could not. She was one of them now, a warrior who had looked death in the face and survived, a ghost who walked among the living, carrying the memory of those who had fallen. The headstone she saw was near the end of a row, positioned where the afternoon sun would illuminate it until dusk. New marble, pristine white. The freshness of the stone contrasted with the weathered appearance of surrounding markers that had stood through years of Virginia seasons. The inscription was simple, elegant, true. Thomas Wraith Carter, Sierra Program 1961 to 1993, he walked in shadows so others could walk in light. Elena knelt before her father's grave. The grass beneath her knees was soft, well maintained by the groundskeepers who treated this place with the respect it deserved. The soil beneath the grass contained a warrior who had waited 31 years to come home. The paperwork for the recovery had taken months, diplomatic negotiations with the Somali government, such as it was, coordination with military recovery teams who specialized in finding remains in hostile territories, DNA verification to confirm that the bones recovered from a shallow grave in Mogadishu were indeed Thomas Carter. Senator Reynolds had made it her personal mission, using her position on the Armed Services Committee, her political capital, her determination to bring home a warrior who had died alongside her husband. She had been driven by something beyond politics, driven by the grief of a widow who understood that closure mattered, even after 31 years. Stone stood a respectful distance behind Elena, silent, present, honoring the man who had saved his life by witnessing the daughter who had continued his legacy. His shadow stretched across the grass, joining Elena's, connecting them in this moment of remembrance. Elena reached into her pocket and withdrew the Sierra patch. The same patch that Stone had carried for 31 years. The same patch that Wraith had pressed into his hands on a dusty street in Mogadishu. She placed it against the headstone. "I did it, Dad." She spoke softly, words meant for him alone. "I stepped into the light like you could not, but I am still your ghost when the mission requires it." She traced his name on the stone, the letters that represented a man she had never known and would never know, but who had shaped every aspect of who she had become. "You said the best soldiers are the ones nobody sees coming. You were right. But you also taught me that being invisible only matters if it serves something larger than yourself. I think I finally understand what you meant." The breeze stirred the grass around the headstones. Late afternoon sunlight slanted across the cemetery, casting long shadows that stretched toward the setting sun. Stone approached slowly. He would be extraordinarily proud. The Master Chief's voice was rough with emotion, not just of what you have accomplished, of who you have become. Elena rose, still looking at the headstone. "He trained me, even though he was not there, even though I never knew him. Everything I am started with him." Stone nodded. "Legacy is not just about passing down skills. It is about passing down purpose. Thomas gave you both." They stood in silence for a moment, two warriors honoring a third who would never know the magnitude of his influence. "There is one more stop." Elena turned to face Stone. "Fort Bragg, the memorial wall." Stone understood immediately. The wall was located in a classified facility at Fort Bragg, underground level, a space that existed beyond official acknowledgement, known only to those who had served in programs that the government denied existed. Black granite, silver engravings, names and dates representing 40 years of ghosts who had served in shadows. Wraith 1993, Ghost 1989, Shadow 1987, Spectre 1991. The names continued. 32 entries from the original Cold War program, 15 more from the reactivated modern era. Each name a life given in service to operations that would never appear in any history book. And at the bottom, a new entry, Phantom 2D25. Elena stared at her own call sign carved into the granite. "I am not dead." Stone stood beside her, a slight smile on his weathered face. "No, but you died to the shadows." Colonel Morrison had it added last month. He said that every Sierra graduate who steps into visibility earns a place on this wall. Not because they died, but because they sacrificed invisibility for something larger. Elena traced her call sign with one finger. The letters felt solid, permanent, a monument to something that transcended individual life. Beneath her name, a new inscription had been added, words that had not been there before. "Daughter of Wraith, heir to the legacy." She walked in light so others could know ghosts are real. Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. The second time since Syria that she had allowed herself to cry. The original operators, the ones from the Cold War, do their families know? Stone shook his head slowly. "Some do, not all." Operational security prevented full disclosure in many cases. Their sacrifices remain classified. Their names remain hidden. That should change. Elena's voice carried determination. When operational security allows, when enough time has passed, their families should know their warriors mattered. Stone studied her. "You planning to make that happen, Major?" "Eventually, when I have earned enough credibility. When Sierra has demonstrated enough value that we can honor our dead without compromising our living." She stepped back from the wall, looking at the rows of names that represented 4 decades of service in the shadows. "But first, we have a mission in Caracas, hostages to rescue, operators to bring home alive." Stone nodded. "Just another day in the shadows, Phantom." Elena almost smiled. "Not shadows anymore, Master Chief. We are something new now. Visible when we need to be. Invisible when the mission requires it. The best of both worlds." They walked out of the facility together. Commander and executive officer, teacher and student. 2 generations of warriors connected by a legacy that was finally emerging from the darkness. The helicopter waited on the training grounds. The team was assembled, equipment checked, pre-mission protocols completed. Elena boarded last. She settled into the crew chief position where she could see everyone. Her team, her responsibility. Stone sat across from her, whispered to her left, reviewing mission parameters on a tablet, Mitchell checking medical supplies, Walsh preparing weapons with the casual efficiency of a professional who had done this countless times before. Torres, leg healed, sat ready for his first mission since Syria. His eyes met Elena's across the cargo bay, gratitude and respect in the particular bond that formed between warriors who had survived impossible odds together. The helicopter lifted off, climbing into the Virginia sky, banking toward the naval air station where the transport aircraft waited. Elena looked out at the coastline falling away below. She thought about her father in that garage in West Texas, teaching her to see what others missed. She thought about Patriarch in the Nevada desert, teaching her to become invisible. She thought about Wraith dying in Mogadishu so Stone could live. She thought about the wall at Fort Bragg with its names of operators who had served in shadows. And she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The shadows had been necessary. The invisibility had been vital. The sacrifices had mattered. But sometimes, just sometimes, the most important thing a ghost could do was let people see that ghosts were real, that they were not supernatural or unaccountable, that they were simply Americans who had dedicated everything to a standard of excellence most people could not imagine. They were warriors who existed so others could survive. They were Sierra, and now finally the world knew they were out there, watching, protecting, creating paths through impossible darkness. One mission at a time, forever. Stone's voice cut through her thoughts. Ready, Phantom? Elena looked at her team, at Stone, who had carried her father's memory for 31 years, at Walsh, who had learned the cost of assumptions, at Mitchell, whose hands had kept Torres alive, at Whisper, who represented the future of everything Sierra had built. My father told me once that ghosts are never ready. We just show up when we are needed. She looked out the window at the horizon, stretching toward whatever waited in Caracas. And right now we are needed. The helicopter banked east, carrying them toward the next mission, the next challenge, the next opportunity to prove that Wraith's sacrifice had not been in vain. In the cargo bay, surrounded by operators who trusted her with their lives, Major Elena Phantom Carter allowed herself a moment of something she rarely experienced. Peace. Not the peace of rest, not the peace of endings, the peace of understanding, of knowing exactly who she was and why she was here and what she was meant to do. She was her father's daughter. She was Stone's redemption. She was Sierra's future. And she was just getting started. The horizon beckoned. The darkness beyond it held hostages who needed rescue, enemies who needed defeating, missions that needed completing. The ghosts flew toward it. Together, in the years that would follow, the story of Elena Carter would become legend in special operations circles. Not the kind of legend that appeared in newspapers or television interviews. The quiet kind. The kind that operators passed to each other in hushed voices at training facilities and forward operating bases. They would speak of the woman who killed 68 enemies to save 12 Americans, of the daughter who honored her father's sacrifice by making her own, of the ghost who stepped into the light so that other ghosts could know they were not alone. They would speak of Sierra program, no longer hidden in shadows but standing in the space between darkness and light, visible to those who needed to see, invisible when the mission required. They would speak of Master Chief Stone, who carried a metal patch for 31 years and finally found the person it belonged to, of Walsh, who learned that the smallest warrior in the room might be the strongest, of Reynolds, who transformed grief into advocacy and helped bring a fallen hero home. And they would speak of Wraith, Thomas Carter, the ghost whose sacrifice started everything, whose death taught a program to value survival, whose daughter proved that legacy was not about repeating the past but building the future. The helicopter disappeared over the horizon, carrying the ghost toward whatever waited in Caracas. Behind them in Arlington National Cemetery, a new headstone caught the last light of the setting sun. The words carved into marble would endure for generations, a testament to a man who had given everything for people he would never know. He walked in shadows so others could walk in light. And in Fort Bragg, on a wall that officially did not exist, a new entry bore witness to what had changed. Phantom, 2025 daughter of Wraith, heir to the legacy. She walked in light so others could know ghosts are real. The ghosts had found their voice. The shadows had found their champion. And the legacy continued. Forever. The end.